You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Common Descent Podcast. This is episode 202, Fungi and Animals. This is the third and final part of our fungus celebration trilogy. Episode 200 was fungi, the most requested topic in the history of the podcast. Last episode, we did fungi and plants with our favorite paleobotanical guest, Allie. This episode, we're rounding off the series with fungi and animals.
Episode 200, part 3.
Episode 200, part 3, episode 202, fungi and animals. This is it. This episode, we're going to get to talk about the relationship between fungus and animals. We're going to get to talk about stuff that we are far more familiar with than in the previous two episodes. And we'll get to talk about a bunch of the things that haven't yet made it into this trilogy. So be prepared for fun discussions of symbiosis and pathogens and parasitism, and also mushrooms. We'll talk about mushrooms. It's gonna be a whole bunch of fun.
I feel like this will be a fun thing for people who have been listening along. And now we are probably going to get to finally check off, fill out the rest of your bingo card for the things you've been waiting for us to mention about fungi.
Oh man, we should have made a fungi episodes bingo card.
Yeah, we really should have.
That'd be cool. Yes, you will finally hear us get to some of the stuff you've been waiting for us to get to.
Next episode 200, we'll do that.
Episode 400, if we don't get to things that you wanted to hear about, send in a request for things you want to hear about. Every episode of the podcast is a topic requested by our audience. This episode was requested by all those people that we shouted out in episode 200, which was a preposterously long list, and then again a also long but less preposterous list in episode 201. This is, for the first time in an exceedingly long time, an episode where we will not be shouting out the requesters because we have said all of the names.
Yes.
All of the names.
Yes.
As many names as we could possibly say.
Pretty sure that's as many names as there are.
If you're listening to this episode, you've listened to the first two because that's how trilogies work.
Yes.
And all of our listeners know how to do trilogies. So you've already heard all the requesters.
You can't just start with Ewoks. You have to work up to it.
You gotta, otherwise what's going on? Well, a little bit what's going on anyway. Before we get into the bulk of the things, some announcements for this episode. Now, before we get into our regular announcements, one upfront important real-world scenario announcement. A number of our listeners have reached out to us to check in to see if we are okay after Hurricane Helene. And we are. We are doing very well. We are located in Northeast Tennessee, which is part of the region that was hit really hard by the effects of the hurricane. Fortunately for us, our immediate area has not been hit particularly hard by many of those effects, but we are surrounded by places that are struggling. We are nearby to a lot of communities that have been dealing with power outages and damage and people being cut off from other places. The difficulties stemming from Hurricane Helene's trip inland are very extensive. Lots of people are struggling with this, and lots of communities are looking for assistance. We will be making donations through the podcast to two local organizations. Second Harvest Food Bank, which provides meals and is currently putting together a hurricane relief specific fund, and the East Tennessee Foundation, which puts together grants to help other organizations in dealing with disaster relief efforts. Listeners, if any of you are willing and able, we encourage you to look into ways that you can help out. There are tons of organizations, big scale, small scale, community level, looking for donations of money or donations of supplies or volunteers to volunteer their time moving or delivering supplies or helping out with relief efforts. So we encourage you to look into and check out those opportunities if you would like to find a way to help. Situations like this are among the reasons that we at the podcast try to emphasize the importance of understanding, respecting, and supporting environmental science.
Yes.
Which is the realm of science that helps us to be better prepared and more resilient in the face of situations like this. This is directly relevant to science education efforts. Also, a particularly important sentiment to keep in mind here in the United States, where we are coming upon election season. There are many different positions up for election during this upcoming election season, and there are some candidates who are very supportive of environmental science efforts, and there are others that are not. If you are a fellow U.S. citizen who is eligible to vote, we encourage you to go ahead and do so.
Yes, please.
We know we have a bunch of listeners in the areas that have been heavily affected, and we hope that everybody is doing okay, and we wish you the best of luck in returning as much as possible to life as normal.
Yeah, stay safe and good luck.
Moving on to brighter topics and our more usual announcement type stuff. This podcast is supported by Patreon. It's one of the reasons we're able to make donations and do things like that, in addition to our regular science education content. People who support us on Patreon get access to all sorts of cool goodies, bonus audio from us. We do live streams. There's all sorts of prizes and like physical stuff, all sorts of cool things you can get. At certain levels of our Patreon, when you join, you get a shout out on the podcast. This episode, we would like to welcome new patrons Josh and Professor Paul.
Welcome. Thank you so much for your support.
Dear listeners, there are many ways to engage with us. You can find a link to our Patreon down in the episode description. We're also on the social medias, and we've got a Discord server. You can go check out all those things. Also, it's October when this episode comes out. That's spooky season.
Yeah, it is.
By the time this episode comes out, we will have released the first 2 episodes of this year's Spook-E, where we are speculatively evolving tiny monsters. We have had a ton of fun with Spooky, and already as of this recording, the Discord Spooky and Speculative Evolution channels are going nuts. People have all sorts of cool comments and conversations to have. It's great.
It's been so much fun. Check those out. Jump into the conversation if you have thoughts.
There will be 1 spooky episode for every Saturday in October this year. That is 4 episodes, and then a Cute E episode, and then our spooky live stream on November 9th, open to anybody. Follow links down in the episode description to find places where you can get reminders of those things. Also, Spotlight 2024 is continuing all throughout the year, where we are interviewing our fellow podcasters, science communicators in paleontology, so be sure to check that out too. Our most recent episode, we interviewed Dave Marshall from Paleocast.
Yeah.
Speaking of ways to engage with us, we have a mailbox that you can send physical mail to if you are so inclined. Some people are so inclined. We got a postcard from the Messel Pit.
Yeah.
From Alexandra, who told us about the cool experience at the Messel Pit, including croc poop and the cool fossils that are there. Some of the stuff we talked about in that episode 160. Very cool.
Yeah, the postcard is also the ticket to the Messel Pit, which I find very cool. That is awesome.
There's a free idea for any museums out there who haven't heard about it yet.
Yeah, that's so neat. It's a very cool way to wrap up a souvenir and a postcard at the same time.
Yes, so thank you, Alexandra. That is lovely. We also got a little Halloween message from Elizabeth, complete with some stickers and a very cool snake-patterned stone dish with some snake-patterned napkins, which I am very happy with.
Very fancy.
Those are super cool. Those napkins are super cool and great, and I won't use them because they look too cool.
Well, they're just for when we set the table.
Just for setting the table. Don't you dare wipe your hands on those.
And then here's the actual napkin.
Here's the real napkin.
Hide it in your lap so that we look fancy.
Here's the napkin, but we put plastic over it so that nothing gets on.
We laminate these.
So, thank you to Elizabeth and Alexandra. And hey, if you'd like to send us something, you can do so. Our link, or follow links and find our mailing address on our website. As we mentioned, this is the 3rd episode of our fungus trilogy. A couple of things to correct from last time's episode, which our listeners were very insistent and polite, which is the best way to do it.
Yes.
In pointing out to us. Spanish moss is not a lichen.
Yes.
This was, it's funny, I talked to Allie about this, and she was like, oh, I knew that.
Mm-hmm.
So Spanish moss, or at least the thing that we typically think of as calling Spanish moss, Tillandsia usneoides, is a plant. But it isn't a moss, it's actually a bromeliad.
Yes.
Which is extremely bizarre. It also is called grandpa's beard in some places. there are mosses that are lichens. There are things that are called moss that are lichens, including beard moss, which is also sometimes called old man's beard, which is a name that is also used for some plants. So, you can see where the names get confused. Also, reindeer moss is another one that is apparently a lichen.
Well, I saw lots of people comparing it to the situation of, like, daddy long legs. Which part of the country, of here in North America country, you are in, and people talk about daddy long legs, depends on whether you're talking about a spider or a harvestman.
Yes.
And I was...
Or a cranefly.
Yeah, or a cranefly. And I was extremely confused when I watched Mythbusters, and they were talking about the wrong daddy long legs because they're over in California.
The other thing that some of our listeners pointed out to us is that we mentioned in passing the idea that ergot poisoning was behind the Salem witch trials, which apparently is an outdated and fairly debunked but often repeated idea.
Yes.
That this was an idea that was put out there some number of decades ago, gets a lot of traction because it's exciting sounding, and so it gets repeated a lot. So much so that even us, we got it in our heads too. So yeah, that apparently not true, and the site that I found to read about that and sort of double check the information, one of them was the Salem Witch Museum.
Yes.
Which has a page about, this is an old idea, we don't think that that's true these days. So those are some things that we were wrong about.
Yes.
Hey, one more thing to do before we get into our main podcast, and that is to talk about somebody else's podcast. This October, not only is it spooky, not only is it got all sorts of fungus stuff from us, it is also the month of the return of the Eons podcast. Eons Surviving Deep Time, the same people that make the Eons YouTube channel, is back. We've got a bunch of friends and colleagues who are part of the Eons team, and here's a little thing that we're going to read off about Eons that they sent over to us. Ahem! Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in the ancient past, like 66 million years ago as the age of dinosaurs was ending, or 500 million years ago during the Cambrian explosion? Do you think you could survive? Could any human? For the team who produces the popular YouTube channel PBS Eons, this is a question they get asked all the time. Eons, Surviving Deep Time, is a podcast that explores this simple yet fascinating hypothetical. In each episode, host Callie Moore takes Michelle Barboza Ramirez, Blake DePestino, Gabriel Santos, and special guests on a time-traveling journey into Earth's history. A number of those names are people who have been on our podcast.
Yeah.
Along the way, they'll discuss the conditions that they'll have to grapple with. We're talking apex predators, food sources, environmental hazards, and massive climactic events. Whether you're a fan of natural history or just a good what-if, you'll enjoy Eons Surviving Deep Time, available wherever you get your podcasts.
So check that out.
Go check it out. We love the Eons people. They're super cool. They do a great job. I believe their first episode of this new season is already out as of the beginning of October, which I believe is Callie and Hank Green. So go listen to that. They're super cool. I'm all announced out, which means news. Every episode, before we get into our main topic, we like to cover some news from the scientific realms of our interest. Will, what news did you bring today?
I have pterosaur news, but not about how they fly, how they walk.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like this news.
I'm excited.
This is cool. This is research by Robert Smythe et al. In Current Biology. The article is by Laura Bisas in Popular Science.
We'll put that link in the blog post.
So pterosaurs, the flying reptiles of the Mesozoic.
Episode 79.
The earliest flying vertebrates, first ones to take flight after insects. Huge big deal. And a lot of studies have looked into how they fly, what the flight mechanics and aerodynamics and like nature of the membrane in their wings were like. But there's not been as much look into how they moved around terrestrially on the ground. You know, what kind of habitats were they adapted for, or more efficient in, or how efficient were they on the ground? This research examined the hands and feet of pterosaur fossils, looking across a bunch of different species throughout their evolutionary history and around the world, so huge diversity, and found some really interesting patterns, particularly in small and larger pterosaurs, that seemed to indicate they were adapted to very different modes of movement The first thing they noticed was that they had a very high degree of diversity in their hands and feet,
Interesting.
indicating a wide range of adaptations and ecological mobility modes. They said the diversity was on par with modern birds.
Wow.
So they were not just moving around one way and one kind of environment. They were doing all sorts of different things, probably for different ecosystems, different environments, and moving in different ways.
Yeah, which makes a ton of sense.
Oh, yeah.
They were all over the world. They were super diverse. But I've never really put any thought to that before, that pterosaurs didn't all walk the same way.
Yes. The two big trends they found were climbing and walkers.
Okay, that would have been my guess.
Yeah. They found that smaller, earlier, non-pterodactyliform pterosaurs.
Sure. Things like Rhamphorhynchus
Yes.
and those.
These were often the ones that you think of being smaller and having the long tails. They have hands and feet that scream climbing. That look, that as they compared it to climbing lizards and birds like woodpeckers.
Okay.
Grasping hands. They noted that some of the things that indicate a climbing hand, which I always love to learn from papers like this, is the bones of the fingers and toes at the base bones of those digits, very short, relatively short. The bones farther from the hand were longer and then had large curved claws.
Yeah.
These are both modifications for strong grips and indicate that, yeah, they were almost surely climbing trees. They said that this probably meant that they were specialized for arboreal lifestyles, which is part of the reason why they were smaller as well, likely. Because you can't be that big if you're going to be climbing a tree. Orangutan's about as big as we have. That's as big as we have today. You start putting too much strain on the branches if you're huge. Later pterosaurs, the short-tailed pterodactyliforms, which are your more like pteranodon and the Quetzalcoatlus and those bigger members that we typically think of and you see in the displays all the time, they had hands and feet for ground-based walking. Look much more like terrestrial animals. So what we think is normal feet.
Yes.
More
Well,
like,
a lot like our feet.
Yes.
Because they're also plantigrade, I believe, with the heel on the ground.
absolutely. And they noted that their bones show the opposite pattern of the climbers. The base bones of the digits are longer with shorter end bones.
Yeah.
And less curved and shorter claws.
Like my feet.
Yes. These changes correlate with other modifications in the pterosaur anatomy. So we see these along other shifts. Most notably, the back membrane. So they have multiple flight membranes. The back membrane, the curopatagium, is the one between the hind legs. In the early pterosaurs, it connects to the tail like a bat.
Yep. I was just going to say, like bats do.
In the walking pterosaurs, it's split and connects at the base of the tail,
Yep.
giving their legs more freedom for walking.
Yes.
This transition in feet and hand anatomy goes hand in hand with this transition in the curopatagium.
Okay.
That the adaptation for more ground-based walking hands and feet also goes with a more pant leg style leg membrane.
Yeah, that this was an adaptation that wasn't just in the feet.
Yes.
This was a series of adaptations throughout different parts of the body that allowed them to be better walkers.
This change to becoming more efficient walkers dates to a mid-Jurassic colonization of terrestrial environments by pterosaurs, that we see them moving in, out of trees and into wider terrestrial habitats, and that this does not seem to have happened once, but independently in multiple groups.
Ooh.
At least 4 lineages. They said the 4 principal radiations of the larger pterosaurs all seem to have evolved this terrestrial anatomy individually.
Interesting. They were evolving out of the trees, or at least out of a very tree-y environment.
Yes. This transition also syncs up with them moving into a wider variety of feeding ecologies as they start to find new niches. It was pointed out that as they moved from tree to ground, there were already dominant ground animals.
Yep.
So they had to find unique niches that utilize the fact that they are now walking and flying animals. So it likely was part of the reason they came into some really weird feeding anatomies like we've talked about.
Yeah, like those filter feeders that we mentioned in episode 180.
Exactly. This is also what probably allowed, and when we see them get huge.
Yes.
That you can't be giant in a tree, but you can be a giraffe-sized walking around animal.
Yeah.
So there's this very cool pattern of anatomical transition in their hands and feet that's seen in other features that syncs up with this movement from being clinging, climbing animals to effective walking animals and much bigger and filling new niches in the ecosystem.
That's very cool for a number of reasons. Number one, it's a cool thing to know about pterosaurs. Also, it is very reminiscent of modern flying animals. We talked about this in episode 193 when we were talking about hopping, that modern birds, for the most part, on the ground, either walk or hop.
Yes.
And the ones that hop tend to be the ones that are perching, tree-dwelling birds, because if you have feet for hanging out in the tree, that is a different set of requirements than feet for walking around on the ground.
Absolutely.
So you get down on the ground and you have to hop, because that's what your legs are good at doing.
Yes.
We also see something similar in bats, as we've talked about. Bats tend not to be great on the ground.
Yeah.
They crawl or they sort of hop awkwardly down on the ground.
Yeah, like when you think of a bat, like a vampire bat moving around, if you took like a flying fox and put them belly down on the ground, they just have to belly crawl.
Yeah, they move more like sloths.
Yes.
that are down on the ground.
They just have to drag themselves. They can't actually stand up in any sense of the word.
Yes. Also, this is cool because this means that this is something that I share with giant pterosaurs.
Yeah.
My ancestors came down out of the trees.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me wonder, would Rhamphorhynchus have moved around weirdly?
Yeah. Would it have had to crawl around on the ground?
Would it be awkward if you were rehabilitating a Rhamphorhynchus and let it out of the cage? Would it have waddled out and then taken flight?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, hey, while we're in the Mesozoic, I've got news about dinosaurs. Specifically about tail weapons.
Nice.
This is tail weapons are a lot of fun. This is research published in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology by Tariq Karim, Swarnava Chakraborty, and Jeffrey Wilson Mantilla. And in the blog post, we will link to a press release on phys.org from Sonia Mishra at the University of Michigan. The dinosaur in question here is not one of the ones we typically talk about when we're thinking tail weapons. This is a sauropod. Sauropods are your Apatosaurus and your Brachiosaurus, your Diplodocus, long necks, long legs, 4 big column-like feet. This sauropod is named Cretaceous. It is known from the early to middle Jurassic of a region in India called Telangana, dating to somewhere around 170 to 180 million years ago. Cretaceous is a basal sauropod, so it's an early branch of the sauropod family tree. The way that it was actually described while I was reading about it is that it is quadrupedal, so it is a big... It's been estimated at around 9 meters long. So
nice.
30 feet long, 2 to 3 tons. This is a sauropod, but it has a lot in common with prosauropods.
Yeah.
Which were the predecessors of true sauropods, which were often bipedal. So this is sort of an early version of the classic quadrupedal sauropod. Cretaceous is known from partial remains of several different individuals, so we have most of the skeleton between all those different fossils. This study describes some new fossil material from Cretaceous that has been identified as tail clubs. So tail clubs, typically when we think of tail clubs, we're talking about ankylosaurs. Episode 69, at the end of their tail, they have these big bulbous bony structures that they can swing their tail and, take the shins out of a tyrannosaur or something. This is not the first time that tail clubs have been identified in sauropods. In fact, the reason that these researchers were able to identify these partial remains as tail clubs is by comparing them to Shunosaurus and Omesaurus, which are both from China, which both also have tail clubs. As far as I know, tail clubs in sauropods are not quite the giant, bulky things that we think of in, ankylosaurus, but there's still a bulbous bony structure at the end of the tail.
Well, it kind of feels like when you think about medieval maces, and people get the idea of this big ball covered in spikes, when really most of the time it was just like a paperweight on the end of a long metal rod.
That's what these are like.
That's all you actually need to do damage with, is a little extra weight. A golf club is closer to a mace, an actual mace, than most fantasy ones you think of.
Yes. Shunosaurus, one of the ones from China, has relatively complete tails known, which means that it's a great comparison for describing these. The authors did some investigating. Mostly they seem to be describing the anatomy of it. They did note that they did CT scans, which show that inside the bones of the club are incremental growth lines.
Ooh.
So there is the potential to investigate how they develop. Through their analysis, they conclude that the club actually is made up of multiple bones.
Okay.
They said as many as 3, which seem to fuse together as the animal matures.
Oh, nice.
So, similar to a lot of the bones in our body, they are multiple parts that as we grow up, they fuse together into a full, femur or skull or whatever.
That's very cool.
Now, I didn't see a specific note about if they have an estimate of when that happens during the life of the animal.
Yeah.
It could be that it's something that happens when they're relatively young or at maturity.
Yes.
When now they're going to be using these for some sort of sexual mating ritual combat type stuff.
Absolutely. Well, and it brings up the question of, because like with many of our bones that aren't fused when we're younger, that's quote unquote by design, like that is for an anatomical reason. It makes them easier to grow.
Yes.
While we're growing quickly as young children and in puberty, having them unfused lets us grow the bones in the way they need to. Then we can fuse them and make them as strong as possible once they're at their adult size.
Right.
Or is it a situation of it takes a while, like crocodilian skeletons are unfused as babies and then just slowly fused from the back to the front.
Yes,
as
elephants
they grow.
Do a similar thing where their fusion lasts a long time.
Is it just a thing that it takes a while to fuse this into the ideal club?
Yes.
Or is there a reason you want it unfused for the young dinosaurs?
Or a reason you don't need it unfused?
Yes, that you don't need it
young.
Fused yet.
Either because it's a mating thing and you're not mating yet, or maybe you're not big enough yet, you're hanging out with the herd, so you're not defending yourself because you're little. Another interesting point that they made is that Cretaceous, this new, it's not a new species, but newly known to have clubs, as well as the other 2 in China, Cretaceous from India and Shunosaurus and Omesaurus from China, all of them have a similar anatomy of the club, and they're all early to middle Jurassic, which raises the question of, were clubs particularly common at this time? Is this something that evolved multiple times, or did it evolve once and these all inherited it? Did it evolve in some groups and then was lost later? We don't have a lot of information yet about sort of the dynamics of which sauropods had clubs, how many times did clubs evolve? Because these are an early bunch of sauropods, and like I said with Cretaceous, an early branch of sauropods, these clubbed sauropods might be an important part of the transition from before sauropods to later true famous sauropods.
Yeah.
Was there a time when it was really good to have clubs? Was it a particular part of the family tree that they had clubs? These questions we don't know the answers to yet.
It's always a fun question because it can be easy to want to say there must have been some reason these clubs were happening during this time, but it could also just be that this lineage, it makes me think of like pig tusks are fairly unique among tusks. Like not a lot of animals have sideways facing tusks. That's kind of weird when you think about it. Most of them have them forward facing, but we're used to it because pigs are super common.
Yes.
And they're not weird to us. But if you zoom out, you go, actually, that's pretty weird to have your tusks stick out almost horizontally. It could just be like this, where it's this group did a thing that's kind of weird, but it worked for them, and it stuck around for a while.
Yeah.
So, that's so cool. Well, speaking of dinosaurs, they died
They did, that's
at
true.
the end of the Cretaceous,
I've heard about that.
the KPG mass extinction.
Episode 5.
This is a study noting another impact site that dates to about the same time as the KPG extinction. And this has been all over the news of a second strike along with the Chicxulub impactor that might have also been part of that event. But this is more just a cool description of this impact site. This research is by Ushjin Nicholson et al. In Nature Communications, Earth and Environment, and the article is by Murgakshi Dixit in Interesting Engineering. So this is the Nadir Crater.
Mm-hmm.
This is offshore of West Africa. It's 300 meters beneath the Atlantic Ocean floor and is a fairly recently discovered crater. It's near the KPG boundary, so the end Cretaceous, in its dating, but initially it had only been identified by 2D seismic data. This research paper is describing it with 3D data, getting a detailed look at what this crater is like, what caused it, and what effects it would have had in the surrounding area.
Yeah.
They described that the data they had was allowed them to image this crater in exceptional detail, unique among most craters study, like a evidently new level of detail that we don't typically get to see craters in.
Very cool.
Demonstrates that it was indeed formed by a hypervelocity impact. They said beyond a reasonable doubt. Indeed.
This is an impact crater.
Impact crater, something from space hit down here.
Cool. Yeah, impact craters, like asteroid impact craters, have a characteristic shape to them.
Yes. It's the same way as like if you were to shoot something or blow it up slightly, it would leave a different mark on the thing.
Well, this is how ballistics
Exactly.
and forensics works. The Chicxulub crater down in the Yucatan of Mexico, the classic crater of the KPG extinction, also was discovered in a similar way. It is buried deep below the surface, partially underwater. Detailed analysis allowed researchers to say, okay, this is a structure in the shape of an impact crater.
Exactly. That's what happened here. They were able to tell that the impactor would have come in at a 20 to 40 degrees angle from the northeast because of spiraling thrust-generated ridges, which are characteristic of low-angle impacts.
I don't have enough knowledge to know exactly what that means.
Yep.
But that's awesome.
Yeah, right?
There is a shape in the crater that shows you what direction it came from.
That when things hit at different angles, the crater is shaped differently, and evidently specific kinds of structures are associated with different groups of angles. Seismic mapping reveals that it is a near circular crater with a rim that has a diameter of about 9.2 kilometers, roughly 5 miles.
Okay.
And the outer brim, like the outer edges of the affected area, are roughly 23 kilometers in diameter.
Okay. Yeah, this is also, I believe, the case with Chicxulub and other impact craters, is that there's an inner ring and an outer ring.
Yes, exactly. Like where it hit and then the other stuff it did.
Yes.
Original estimates for the size of the asteroid that would have hit down here was about 400 meters wide. This new data suggests that it's probably closer to 450 to 500 meters wide.
Okay. Half a kilometer across.
Yep, due to the larger size that they got for the crater from the 3D data.
Yeah. For comparison, the Chicxulub impactor is estimated at about 6 kilometers wide.
Yes.
So 12 or more times bigger than this estimate.
Absolutely. Which is also a great thing to keep in mind, because the other stuff they're about to describe is also just horrifying in how crazy this impact would have been.
You said the size of that crater, that the outer ring is 23 kilometers or so. I want to say the Chicxulub is like 300 kilometers. Yep. Chicxulub is huge.
Yep.
This is half a kilometer of asteroid.
Yes.
Is certainly big.
They made a point to say this is still bigger than any asteroid impact that humans have ever witnessed.
Yes.
This is nothing this big has ever touched down since we've had recorded history.
Mm-hmm.
They estimate that this would have hit Earth at about 20 kilometers per second.
Sure.
Or roughly 72,000 kilometers per hour, if you're wanting to, match it with your car. Still need to confirm this based on new impact models, but roughly speaking, the extended damage zone is evident across the region. well beyond the perceived limit of the impact crater, except for a sheltered zone to the east, which I don't know the details of that, but I thought that was interesting that there's evidently an area that kind of got...
That doesn't show damage.
Yeah. And speaking of the damage, they were able to put together a basically step-by-step of what would have happened as this asteroid hit down. After the collision, it created the bowl-shaped crater. Soft sediments in the surrounding area would have flowed inside and filled that void, forming a visible rim. Further on, the impact triggered earthquakes, liquefying the sediments, which basically means shaking up the sediment so that it flows like a liquid, beneath the seabed, leading to the formation of faults, and also generating enormous tsunamis traveling across the Atlantic Ocean.
Sure.
It also caused the plateau margin to collapse, leading to a large landslide in the surrounding area. So mainly this research is just a very cool detailed look at the asteroid. It's been getting a lot of news attention because it syncs up with the in Cretaceous and potentially the same general time as the Chicxulub impact.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that when Nadir was discovered, when this crater was first described, that's what it gets a lot of attention for.
Yes.
Could this be a secondary impact site?
And that is something that is definitely a possibility. They did not make any definitive claims in this paper one way or the other. It sounds like we will still need more information to confirm whether or not this should be included in the list of things that went wrong at the end of the Cretaceous.
Yes.
But it definitely is a suspiciously timed and decently sized impact, so it's worth looking into.
Yeah, if nothing else, that this is another impact that we know about from some time.
Yes.
That increases our understanding of when impacts have happened and what their effects have been.
And they noted that because of the high detail they were able to get on the data for this, it's going to help inform impact models and the ways we investigate new craters that we discover. They're hoping for the next step to drill into the crater and get some samples that will help confirm things like the shock pressures and exact age of the impact.
Excellent. Very cool.
Yeah.
Whenever secondary impact comes up, there is that question of, was this a cluster of asteroids that came past the Earth? Was this one asteroid that broke into pieces as it came in?
And this is very likely not the last we'll hear about this crater.
Oh, sure.
As its dates come out and it is further studied.
Well, I've got one more bit of news, and we're going to keep this whole news section firmly in the Mesozoic era. But this one is not about dinosaurs or pterosaurs or even asteroids. This one's about fireflies.
Cool.
This is research by Chenyang Cai et al. In Proceedings of the Royal Academy B, and we will link to a press release in phys.org from the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Fireflies are a very famous group of insects. They are known for being bioluminescent. They make their butts glow. Some of them flash their butt glow, and some of them have just a continuous glow that lasts for a while. Fireflies are beetles that belong to the family Lampyridae. They are they're very famous and recognizable today, but there is not very much in the way of a fossil record of fireflies. Part of that is, they're small, all the things that make insects difficult to fossilize. They often tend to be relatively soft.
Yes.
They can be hard to identify. This study describes a new species of fossil firefly from the Mesozoic era. This comes from early Cretaceous Myanmar amber. It's around 99 million years old. They have named the new genus and species Flammarianella huhaikuni, based on it is a fairly well-preserved, it looks like they have basically the entire body of this firefly.
Nice.
The specific features of the body link it with a modern group called Luciolinae, which among modern fireflies includes the flashing fireflies.
Yeah.
So the ones that blink their bioluminescence. Included among these features is a light organ.
Yay!
Near the end of the abdomen. We can see that same organ, very similar in its anatomy to what we see in those modern Lucioline fireflies. So this was very possibly a blinking firefly.
Yes.
From the early Cretaceous. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, we don't have a lot of firefly fossils. Also, this suggests that that bioluminescent feature has been fairly stable since the Mesozoic, that it hasn't changed dramatically from those early fireflies to the modern ones. Also, this is apparently the second known bioluminescent firefly from the Mesozoic.
Yep.
So, very little in the way of a fossil record. Also unusual among this bug are specialized organs in the antennae. They noted that in several segments of the antennae are these deep oval-shaped pits that are probably, the authors think, some kind of olfactory organ.
Makes sense.
That it was, that antennae, that's what antennae are good for. So it had some sort of special sensory structures on the antennae.
Cool.
This is very exciting because this adds new information. It sheds light about the evolution of fireflies and their relatives. A previous study from a few years ago by the same team of researchers identified another firefly relative also from the early Cretaceous. So they suggested that there may have been a diversification of fireflies at this time. If that's the case, why there was a diversification at this time might have to do with, this is when flowering plants are becoming very prominent, and that is when we see the diversification of lots of groups of insects that rely on those plants. It could also have to do with the functioning of the bioluminescent organ, the glowing organ, which we typically think of it as being a mating thing. Fireflies blink or glow to attract potential mates. But there are other functions. Some of them also use it for luring in prey and for defense. That this can be an aposematic display of a warning sign.
Yeah, I taste bad.
I taste bad, or like bright colors on animals. The authors note that this is also around the same time that we see diversification in groups like birds and frogs, which are common predators of insects. So it could be that this is related to environmental stuff. If this was a defensive tool, it could have diversified in response to there being all of these dangerous insect eaters around.
Absolutely. Very cool. Very fun just because bioluminescence, awesome, glowing animals. That's tons of fun.
Absolutely.
And as is always fun to be able to note is another thing that we can picture us sharing experiences with dinosaurs.
Yep.
T-Rex also got to chase fireflies at night if it so chose. But also just neat to note that it goes back that far and seem like the fact that this one goes to a modern recognizable group and not just an extinct lineage entirely is surprise. I was not expecting that. And that's very cool if it means that, it seems like this has been a fairly stable feature because it's a weird feature.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of glowing insects. Most insects don't glow.
No. And there's not a lot of groups that have accomplished it.
Yes. So it's a very unique thing. And it seems like you figured it out a while ago and have stuck with a very similar organ to that since then.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
It's pretty cool.
Makes it wonder are you using it the same way that the ones today are?
Yeah. And was this more of a defensive thing? Was this... Did you glow a different way?
Yes, exactly.
Right? Were you blinking or were you doing some other thing?
Or were you doing something that is basically the same as a lot of the ones today, and that's why it stayed so similar. That fireflies were being fireflies the way we recognize fireflies being fireflies back in the Cretaceous.
For the last 100 million years.
Yeah. Very cool.
Very cool stuff. That's the news, which means it is time to move on to our main discussion, which is our third part of our fungus trilogy. After the break, we will move on from talking about all these animals to talking about fungi and also animals and the relationships that they have together. Join us after this brief musical interlude. So as we have been discussing in the past two episodes, fungi are everywhere.
All over the place.
Just all over the place. Because of that, they cannot help but have interactions and tight relationships with other organisms. Last episode, we talked all about the relationships and interactions between fungi and plants. In this podcast, all the time, we talk about the relationships between animals and plants. This episode, fungi and animals.
The final combination of the trifecta.
Now we're bringing them all together. This episode, fungi and animals, will allow us to explore a bunch of things that are more familiar to us, being animals and our interactions with fungi, but also will allow us to touch on a bunch of stuff that just didn't fit in the last couple of episodes. So we will get to explore some new facets of fungus ecology and biology through the lens of animals, which, of course, is our comfort zone. Now, there's a whole lot of different things that we're going to cover in how fungi and animals interact with each other, but we're going to start with the biggest and most obvious one. Lots of animals eat fungus.
I sure do.
That fungus is, like plants, a source of food.
Mm-hmm.
So the almost certainly one of the most famous and common interactions between fungi and animals is fungivory.
Yeah.
Also, you'll see mycophagy.
Oh, yeah.
These are both words that mean eating of fungi. Lots of animals eat fungi. Fungi are quite nutritious. Fungal tissues tend to be high in water, high in carbohydrates, and they contain various proteins and minerals and vitamins. Fungi are good for you.
Yep.
Not all of them, but some fungi, eating fungal tissues can be good for you.
Good eats.
Lots of invertebrates eat microscopic fungal tissues. So the actual mycelium itself, those microscopic threads of fungal tissue, spores of fungi. There are a bunch of insects and arachnids and snails that feed on these microscopic bits of fungi, similarly to how invertebrates will feed on algae and things like that. Some species of beetles and mites, for instance, are exclusively mycophagous.
Yeah.
They only eat fungal tissues. They tend to collect spores in particular, and indeed, these fungus specialists have mouth parts that are comb-like.
Yeah.
They've got these little projections for scraping spores off of surfaces or off of fungal tissues.
Cool.
Quite similar, in fact, to mouth parts of pollen-feeding insects.
Makes sense.
Very similar. They have combs and they scrape the spores off of tissues.
Neat.
There are also insects and snails that are known to feed on lichens. Last episode, lichens that's the best of both worlds.
Right.
You're getting some of your plant-like nutrition and you're getting some of your fungus-like nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's two food groups.
That's just a salad now.
And, of course, there are animals that eat macroscopic fungal tissues, typically mushrooms.
Yeah.
Mushrooms or other fruiting bodies. We talked in previous episodes that a lot of fungi produce fruiting bodies that make spores and that are often big. Big enough to see, big enough to eat. Mushroom eating is widespread across different groups of animals. There are reptiles that do it. There are turtles and some lizards that are known to eat mushrooms. Various birds will eat mushrooms. Apparently, pygmy parrots are thought to have a high fungus diet.
Oh, okay.
And woodpeckers, I saw this noted, I don't know that woodpeckers are eating a lot of fungus, but they will sometimes break into fungal bodies to get insects out of the fungus.
Yeah.
The same way that they would with the bark of a tree. There are also, some birds will include fungal tissues in their nests.
Okay.
The same way that birds might include plant, twigs and leaves and stuff in their nest, some birds put fungi in their nests. And there are tons of mammals that eat fungi. Rodents, rabbits, armadillos are all known to go after mushrooms, and of course, humans.
Yes.
We eat hundreds of species of fungus.
Oh, yeah.
Are cultivated by us to devour.
It is a huge industry.
Yes, and rightfully so, because mushrooms are delicious.
Guys, yeah, they're so good.
Fantastic. I saw it noted in one reference that in certain dry environments, like dry woodlands, Some mammals might get most or all of their water from mushrooms.
Really?
But that is a prominent source of hydration for some places.
Neat. I never thought about them being that juicy.
Yeah, they're very water
Yeah.
heavy. I mean, yeah, aren't we all?
Yes.
But they do have a high water content.
Cool.
Some squirrels apparently are known to collect and cache mushrooms.
Oh, yeah.
The same way that they'll like store acorns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They will cache mushrooms, and apparently some of them are known to sit them out to dry
Whoa.
and then cache them.
That's like that is
Yeah.
a cure, like curing meat.
Yeah, because they have, like we just said, they have a high water content.
Yes.
So that's just gonna, I mean, it's already fungus.
Yeah, but which is always a funny thing to remember, that a mushroom can rot.
Yeah, mushroom can mold.
Yes. And so you have to dry it out if you want it to last the winter.
Yeah, apparently squirrels know to do that.
That's pretty cool.
They'll sit it out in the sun, and then when it's dry, they'll store it away.
That's awesome.
Very cool stuff.
I wonder if acorns and mushrooms pair well together.
I don't know.
I assume.
I mean, in like Breath of the Wild,
Yeah,
you
yep.
can put them together in the same.
At least 4 hearts worth.
Absolutely. So those squirrels are ready to save the kingdom. There are also lots of mammals that will go after underground fruiting bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Truffles. Truffles are famous for they are fruiting bodies of fungi. They're kind of mushrooms that grow underground, and a lot of animals will dig them up. Pigs do this, deer do this, hyenas apparently will do this. They'll dig up truffles.
Cool.
So it is a very common habit among large animals, small animals, to incorporate mushrooms or other fungal bodies into the diet.
Yes. Which makes all this, like...
It's everywhere.
And anything we eat, the other animals are eating it too.
Yeah, we're not the first ones
Yes.
to think of it.
So whatever equals human food, other animals also... maybe not all animals. There are some weird things we eat.
Yes.
But someone else in the animal kingdom also eats it. So the fact that we eat so many mushrooms, it makes sense that it is a common diet among just animals in general.
Well, and like we've talked about with a lot of other food sources or resources, it would be kind of silly not to eat fungi.
Yeah, that is, as we've covered, everywhere.
They're all over the place. They make, in some places, macroscopic fruiting bodies that are full of tissue. They're full of protein. Yeah, eat those.
Yeah.
That absolutely, it makes sense that animals would go after them. I imagine they're easier to eat than plants.
Well, and it's cool. It's very interesting from like comparing it to eating plants, where when you have like grazers on plants, they're often in the same size category as ones eating like fruits and stuff. But here you have like the big mushroom fruiting body things, and then fungal grazers are teeny tiny because mycelium is on a different scale.
Yes.
So you have this very interesting, like, the unseen fungus eaters, and then the obvious fungus, at least for us.
Yes.
Which is very interesting.
Well, and like we've said in the last couple episodes, fungi, for the most part, tend to be microscopic.
Yes.
Like, truly microscopic. So, yeah, most mycophagy is happening at very small scales.
Which is, I love how much these episodes have been pointing out the fact that fungus, but just all the rest of the world around fungus, that is so often invisible to us.
Yeah.
There's this whole ecosystem in the dirt with plants and fungi, but also with things grazing on that fungi in the soil and at the soil level.
Yes.
That unless you get out a microscope, you're just walking over it and walking past it, which is very cool and has that very inner space feel to it of this world that we can't perceive.
Yes.
It's cool.
Yeah. Now, unsurprisingly, eating of fungus is not a new thing.
Mm-mm.
There is direct evidence for it in the fossil record. As far back as the Devonian, there are coprolites with fungal remains inside of them.
Cool.
Fossil poops with spores or mycelium, fungal tissues inside. That suggests that something ate some fungus. At least one early Devonian site, I didn't get the name of this one, but it's in the UK, has been noted that arthropod coprolites with hyphae inside of them are quite common.
Yeah.
That this might have been a common food source at the time. Also, these are known at the Rhynie chert, which we talked about the last couple episodes, which is also from the Devonian, though apparently it's rare at the Rhynie chert,
Interesting.
which could suggest that something ecologically different there, or taphonomically, that it's not being preserved there for some reason.
I also wonder if there's like digestive processes that could give you different results. That
Yeah.
you know, if you get someone who can digest the fungus more fully, will you see as much evidence in their droppings?
Yes. The other thing that is always interesting when examining coprolite evidence of fungal eating, of fungivory in the fossil record, is distinguishing between, was this fungus in the poop before or after it got pooped?
Yeah. Are you decomposing this poop?
Did you come in afterwards because this is a source of food for the fungus?
Yep. I had that thought when you mentioned hyphae, where it's like, couldn't that also, though, is how you go explore for more nutrients.
Yes. There are a couple other examples. There are beetle coprolites from the early Cretaceous of France that contain both spores and hyphae, which suggests they might have been eating specifically fruiting bodies.
Yes.
If they're getting spores and parts of the body. There are also dinosaur coprolites. In the late Cretaceous, there are sauropod coprolites that have fungi inside of them, and they noted in this case that the specific fungi they're seeing in the coprolites are related to species that are known leaf pathogens.
Oh.
So these are diseases that leaves get, and most likely what happened is these dinosaurs ate some infected leaves and ended up eating the fungi with them.
That's cool.
Which is very cool. That's a very cool thing to see.
Man. Awesome.
And at least one site I saw noted from the early Cenozoic of Germany has amber with lichens in it, which we talked last episode, you get lichens in amber, that have grazing trails on them.
Nice.
From snails or some kind of small arthropods that were grazing on these lichens. So we do get some evidence in the fossil record of animals ingesting fungi.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
Animals have been doing animal stuff the whole time.
Now, this is a great opportunity for us to go ahead and talk about a thing we haven't actually stopped to zero in on yet in this fungus trilogy, mushrooms.
Woo!
This was one of the things that was requested a bunch. All those names we read off in the first of the fungi episodes, a bunch of those requests were mushrooms, and we sort of expanded that out to fungi. So let's take a zoom in on mushrooms while we're talking about them getting eaten. The word mushroom, classically, like the strictest sense, refers to white button mushrooms in the genus Agaricus. This is your classic Super Mario Brothers type of mushroom. It has typically three main parts: a stem, called a stipe, which holds it up, the cap, which is the top, which is called the pileus, and underneath the cap, gills, or lamellae, which look like gills.
Yes.
They look like folds, and in those gills is where spores are produced.
Yes.
So if you pick up a mushroom and you turn it upside down, you see those ridges in there. That's where the spores are being produced and then released from.
Cool. I didn't know that there was like a characteristic group for...
That's like the classic, if you are defining them as narrowly as possible, those are mushrooms.
Cool.
Now, the word mushroom is sometimes used more broadly. It might be used to refer to other fungi with gills. So, for example, shelf fungi, which are also called bracket fungi. Those are the ones that grow. You'll see like them on like a fallen log, and they grow straight out from the log as these little like shelves.
They look kind of like half the cap.
Yes.
Without the stem, just stuck onto the side of a log.
Those have gills. Often, typically underneath them, there are gills. They're not classical mushrooms, but they are big fruiting bodies with gills, so they'll sometimes get called mushrooms. Those are all basidiomycetes. So club fungi, true mushrooms, and bracket fungi, those are all basidiomycetes. Sometimes mushroom is just used to mean any macroscopic fruiting body.
Yes.
And ascomycetes, cup fungi, also produce big fruiting bodies that include things like morels and truffles. Truffles are not a quote-unquote true mushroom, but they're doing the same job. They
Yes.
are a big structure that produces spores and releases them out into the world. And then sometimes the word mushroom just refers to fungus.
Yes.
So any fungus, any part of the fungus. Some species are called mushroom, like the name of the species, like white button mushroom. So the mycelium of that is still technically white button mushroom.
Yes.
So the word mushroom kind of gets used fairly broadly for our purpose, and we've done this in these episodes, is using the word mushroom to refer to basically any big fruiting body that has any shape. But the classic true mushrooms are your Super Mario Brothers white button mushrooms with a stalk with a hat kind of shape.
Yes. Well, and it's like I'd always heard them called puffball mushrooms.
Yes.
For the ones that poof the spores out.
Yeah, which are not technically mushroom shaped.
And I'd never thought about that until you mentioned that. Oh yeah, it is weird that we call those mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
But they're doing the same job, so I'd never questioned it.
Yes. I believe true mushrooms are actually a group.
Yeah.
That it is one clade, one taxonomic family
That makes that shape.
that makes that shape.
Cool.
Although there are lots of different shapes of fruiting bodies. Mushrooms are also known from fossils.
Yeah.
There are fossil mushrooms. From what I could find, there are 6 examples of true mushrooms in the fossil record.
Wow.
All known in amber, that makes a lot of sense. 3 of these are known from Dominican amber, which is Miocene, so 10-15 million years old. The genera Copronites, Protomycena, and Oreofungus. All of those are very small, like a few millimeters. These are tiny, tiny, tiny little mushrooms. There are a couple from the early Cretaceous. There's Archaeomarasmius from New Jersey, again amber, and Gondwana garicides from Brazil, which apparently I have seen referred to as the oldest known mushroom.
Cool.
Early Cretaceous. And then there's also Paleoagaricides, which is also from the early Cretaceous. This one's from Myanmar, from the famous Myanmar amber. This one's pretty cool because it is like mushroom. It's a cap. You can see the shape of the mushroom. You can see the gills. You can see all those features. This particular one is notable because there is a fungal parasite on the mushroom
Whoa.
called Mycetophagites, which has hyphae penetrating the tissues of the mushroom, which is something we've kind of hinted at in these last few episodes, that fungi also parasitize other fungi.
Yeah.
So this is a mushroom in amber with a parasite, a fungal parasite on it, and then that parasite has its own fungal parasite
That's
of the genus Entropyzites,
so cool.
whose hyphae are penetrating the other parasite's hyphae.
That's awesome.
It is a 3-stacked parasitic relationship preserved in amber on this mushroom.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's also really notable. Basically, the only mushroom fossils we have are in amber.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just now struck with the kind of, irony is not actually the right use here, but contradiction that mushrooms are pretty soft bodies.
Yep.
Like anyone who's ever cooked or ate a mushroom, they're not tough.
No, they're pretty soft, so they don't fossilize
So they
super
don't
well.
but fungi have cell walls, which is part of what makes plants good at so it's kind of this interesting situation where when we described a fungus cell, that sounds like a cell that should fossilize well.
Yeah.
But yet the structures they make are not as robust as plant structures.
It's also worth keeping in mind that most mushrooms are very short-lived.
Yes, exactly.
Like a mushroom might only exist for a couple of days.
Yes.
So there isn't a very big window of time for it to become fossilized.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's for things that, as we discussed last episode, seem like they've been on land as long as plants have, basically. Mm-hmm. It's really crazy that they are in such a unique situation to avoid the fossil record the way they have.
Yes, they've been hiding the
Yeah.
whole time. Now, that being said, I do have one other example in my fossil mushrooms list. This is Ganodermites, which is not a true mushroom. It's a shelf fungus.
Cool.
Which is known from the mid-Miocene, permineralized.
Ooh.
So it is the actual tissue of the fungus, not an amber, but mineralized like we think of with bones and teeth and stuff. It's several centimeters long and preserves the internal structure of the tissues.
Wow.
So it is possible, though it seems to be rare. That's the only example that I came across.
Yeah. Well, it's like that's also a very nice preservation. So like,
yes,
not only is this, it seems like it's rare for it to happen with mushrooms or fruiting bodies, but also the one we have is exquisite.
yes.
So probably you need very nice fossilization situations.
Yes. Now, all of these fruiting bodies, mushrooms and other fruiting bodies, the thing that they have in common is their job, their function, the thing that they do. Fungal fruiting bodies produce spores, protect the spores until they're ready, and then disperse the spores.
Yes.
Often they're just releasing them into the wind.
Yep.
So your little capped mushrooms with the gills underneath might just be letting the spores go, and then the wind carries them away, hopefully to where they will find food enough to grow. Some mushrooms are specialists at releasing spores into the wind. You mentioned puffballs before. Puffballs can release billions of spores.
A cloud. Like a visible cloud. You will see
of
it.
Single cells.
Yes. So like when they puff and it looks like smoke came out, that smoke is just made out of individual spores.
Yes.
It's so many.
Some fruiting bodies will physically break open to release their spores. Others have special mechanisms to launch their spores. They actually have cellular mechanisms that fling spores into the air. Apparently, and I didn't learn very much detail about this, some puffballs will break free of the ground and bounce along in the wind like tumbleweeds. Releasing spores presumably along the way.
It's just nature's kickball.
Yeah, just bouncing around in the wind.
Cool.
We mentioned there are other fungi in previous episodes. There are some that disperse by water. Fruiting bodies tend, to my knowledge, not to be water dispersed. Often they are wind dispersed. But also, as you might expect, and bringing us back to the main theme of the episode, lots of fungi rely on animals to disperse their spores.
Yep.
The same way that plants do. In fact, the phenomenon of animals eating mushrooms is not accidental the same way that animals eating fruit is not accidental. We did, episode 165 was all about fruit. That's what fruit is for.
Yes.
Plants grow fruit, and it's delicious, and it's often brightly colored, and it's big. Animals eat it, and there's seeds inside, and they disperse them. Fungi do the same things. Often they will rely on animal dispersers the same way that plants rely on pollinators. So some fungi will release smells. Some fungi are smelly to attract certain insects and stuff. Stinkhorn fungi, very famously, smell like decay.
Yes.
To attract flies, and the flies come and they land on the fungus and there's nothing to eat, and then they fly away, but it's too late. You already have spores. And they're going to disperse those spores as they fly around. Some rust fungi produce sugary fluids.
Oh.
That insects and other things will actually feed on, like nectar.
Yeah.
In plants have nectar, and birds and bugs get attracted to it and end up with pollen on the way. Some fungi do the same basic thing. Those animals come to feed and they pick up spores.
I didn't know that there were fungi that did this in a non-gross way.
Yeah. Some of them are, there's just, here, have some food.
Yeah, here's something sweet and delectable. Cool.
And then there are other fungi that get eaten.
Yes.
Like fruit. Fungal fruiting bodies often produce spores that are extra durable to survive digestion. So the animal eats the fruiting body, gets the nutrition, and then poops out the spores, and then they can grow.
And what better place for a fungus to start growing?
Absolutely. Just in the best conditions.
Yeah. This is fantastic.
Truffles, we mentioned before, that there are lots of animals. I mean, the famous example is like pigs sniffing out truffles. There are dogs that can sniff out truffles. That isn't an accident on the fungus's part. The truffles have a smell that attracts predators.
Yes.
Quote, mushroom predators. Truffles are a thing that has evolved multiple times. Not all truffles are related to each other. This is a strategy fungi have developed over and over. They often have very thick skin. They often produce lots of spores, and they tend to develop underground.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're underground, they don't have their own dispersal mechanism. Right? They don't have a stalk. They're not making gills or poofing or anything.
Yeah, there's no wind to help them.
There's no wind. They get dug up by animals that smell the smell. And I saw some paper was discussing that because that's how they disperse, they can devote basically all of the space in a truffle to making spores.
Oh, yeah.
So they tend to have lots of spores because what else are you doing?
Yes.
Other than that, you just smell and you wait.
Yeah. Well, and it's also cool to note that, like, they're, thicker skinned, and so not just anyone can get at a truffle easily.
Yes.
And I love when that happens. We've talked about this with plants and stuff, where it's like this flower can only be pollinated by a select, number of, or maybe one pollinator.
Mm-hmm.
And this ensures that their pollinator is only visiting others of that kind of flower, so it's a much more efficient. But you can also get it with like seeds and stuff. This can only be eaten by a sufficiently tough or big herbivore, because that's who we want dispersing us. We don't want to be chewed up by a rodent and destroy the seed. We want this to be swallowed. Can be a similar thing of big enough, powerful enough people that can dig us up and get to the truffle.
Yes.
Are the ones doing the job.
Absolutely.
That's so cool.
Another important thing to consider with fungal dispersal, this is true in plants, although I don't see this discussed in plants, but I did see it noted specifically in fungi, the importance of secondary dispersers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the main one that I saw mentioned for this are birds.
Mm-hmm.
Birds are not necessarily eating fungi, but they are eating insects.
Oh.
So if a bunch of bugs eat some fungi and then a bird eats a bunch of those bugs, that bird is now potentially spreading spores farther and wider than any of those insects might have.
That's interesting.
I also there was another source that was going through, earlier I listed some, reptiles and birds and mammals that eat fungi. I found a paper that went through different groups, and in one of those discussions, they said snakes might be one of the most effective reptiles at dispersing fungal spores through secondary consumption.
Oh.
Snakes are eating little bugs or little mammals or little reptiles that are eating fungi, and then the snakes themselves become important secondary dispersers.
Fascinating.
Which is super cool. That is not the last time we'll talk about snakes in this episode,
Yeah.
because I did this episode.
This is starting to feel a little bit more like the life cycle of some parasites that have to go through multiple hosts. Right? It's got a little bit of that vibe to it.
Yeah. You're getting ahead of me.
Yeah.
Now, before we talk more about that kind of stuff, there are fungi that use animal dispersers in other ways besides being eaten, and besides the sort of pollinator-like style that we mentioned. For example, a very famous fungus named Cryptoporus grows fruiting bodies that are like these big orbs that have space inside where insects live.
Oh.
So it's sort of a fungus that grows into the shape of a hive.
Yeah.
And you'll have beetles or whatever insects living there, and the fungus grows with a hole in it. I think typically at the bottom, which is the entrance and exit for the insects that live inside, and that hole is surrounded by spores.
Yeah.
So as bugs move in and out of their home, they are gathering spores on them, and they fly off and they disperse those spores.
It's like a fungal domatia, but instead of a plant making a home so that you have protectors, it's housing for your babysitters.
Yes. Yep, and yeah, take the kids and go.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Some shelf fungi have been noted to live in wood that wasps will then bore into, and the spores get inside the wasp's ovipositor, so that when the wasp lays eggs, it's laying spores with the eggs.
Whoa!
And then in some cases, the larvae will hatch and eat the mycelium.
Whoa!
That this is a symbiotic sort of relationship that they have.
Oh.
And then my favorite one before we get on to more dramatic stuff, the fungus Pilobolus, which you already know about, and you'll recognize why here in a little bit. Pilobolus grows on plants, and it develops a sporangium, a spore-producing structure. When an herbivore eats the plants, the sporangium survives the trip and then gets deposited in the poop, and then stalks grow out of the poop to release spores. So it's got that life cycle of, yes, I grow on a plant, the spores go out, they land on a plant, they grow into a structure, they get eaten by an animal, and then pooped, and then the poop is the home where new spores come out of. Pilobolus grows those stalks upwards, and then the stalks will orient towards light. They do this with a vesicle on the stalk that focuses light to detect the direction that light is coming from most strongly. So this is a stalk with an eye.
Yep.
It has a lens that directs light so it can aim at the sun.
Yes.
Or more importantly, so that it isn't aiming at like a wall or the ground or something. Then it builds up pressure in the tissues and launches the spores in a phenomenon called ballistospory. Pilobolus is famous for their incredible spore launching power.
Yes.
They are reportedly, in some cases, will launch spores up to 3 meters. So 10 feet, which is not a lot for me to launch something, but for a microscopic organism, 10 feet is quite an impressive trip.
Yeah, that's so much air resistance when you're that small.
The movement of the spores as they launch out of these stalks has been described as among the fastest movement of any living organism.
Yep.
It like a bullet.
Yes.
Shoom, out of there.
This might be the fastest living thing on our planet.
Yes. Also, and this I already knew that, that's something I had heard of. I didn't know this part. Some nematodes will exist sort of symbiotically with these, and the larvae will hitch a ride on the spores.
What?
And be dispersed with the spores.
What?
So Ant-Man and Hawkeye, the nematode larvae will go along with the spore.
I immediately got the picture of the end of The Martian when he's talking about the plan to get him off planet.
Yes.
And he's like, this is an insane plan. They did point out that it would make me the fastest man who ever lived.
Yes.
Hoping that I'll like that title, which I do. I like it a lot. The
nematode hanging on. And, awesome! Well, and the idea that a single, like a spore making that trip,
yes,
feels like, all right, you're a spore.
You're technically
cell,
alive, but you're not a functioning organism yet.
And you're also like extremely durable.
Yes.
That's your job. You're like pollen. You're like a seed.
You're a capsule to grow into life.
But a nematode larva is like a full living thing.
That's just an animal.
That's just an animal traveling a bajillion miles an hour as far as it's concerned.
I love and I hope
the
that
G-forces.
The reason you have to say that these fungal spores are one of the fastest organisms is because they are ridden by the other organism that goes equal speeds, not under its own power, but it survives. It is moving equally as fast.
Absolutely.
So cool.
Now, because fungi are devoured by lots of animals, unsurprisingly, there are fungal defenses, because fungi don't always want to be eaten.
Yeah, like the fruiting bodies often are made to be eaten, but just the mycelium and stuff.
Yeah, don't eat that.
That's important. That's how we make the fruiting bodies.
These can include physical or chemical defenses. Like, we talked about plant defenses, episode 175. Fungi do a lot of similar things. Some rust fungi, their spores have spines on them to deter getting eaten. Some fungi are toxic. They're actually poisonous. Some mushrooms are poisonous. Sometimes they're just gross. Like, they just are disgusting. The way that, like, a stink bug is just disgusting.
Just unpalatable.
Some of them produce chemicals that are antiviral or anti-disease. And very famously, there are mushrooms that produce chemicals that are mind-altering.
Yep.
That is a defense mechanism. That is very much like the capsaicin in peppers and stuff, this is a thing that these organisms are producing to stop animals from eating them. And then we humans went, boy, this is fun. And we took them.
More, please.
But that is meant to be a defense mechanism on the part of the fungi to ward things away.
Well, and if you think about, like, for trippy mushrooms, even though we humans have and are known to use these recreationally, those are typically used in safe, controlled conditions.
Yes, not when you're out in the middle of the woods.
Yes.
When that happens in a movie, it's bad.
Exactly. Like,
right? Don't drink the cactus juice, because now, especially if you didn't have your friends around,
yes,
no one's there to take care of you.
Like, if a firefighter accidentally eats the wrong mushroom before going off on, that's dangerous and deadly.
Yes.
Like, when you're having
when you're at home,
yes,
sure, fine.
When you have doors you can lock, it's great. When you're trying to survive, suddenly not being able to tell which way is up or what you're seeing is real or not, that just gets you stumbling through the woods and makes you an easy target for predators.
Yes.
And so even it's one of those where it might not stop you from eating that mushroom, but it's going to stop you from eating other mushrooms.
Yeah, it's going to stop you from eating another mushroom. It's going to stop you from having offspring that inherit your taste for mushrooms.
Yep.
Now, you made a very good point a minute ago that fruiting bodies are often built to be eaten so that animals disperse the spores. But of course, there are mushrooms that are poisonous or mushrooms that are toxic. And in some cases, that it might be tissue that for one reason or another is valuable and shouldn't be eaten. But also, fungi will often produce defenses when the fruiting body isn't ready yet.
Yeah.
That very much like ripening of fruits. That's why fruits aren't ripe for a while, because it's not. If you eat this now, you're not dispersing the seeds properly.
Yeah, you're wasting everybody's time.
Yeah, wait till the seeds are ready. When the seeds are ready, this fruit will become delicious.
Yes.
Mushrooms and other fruiting bodies will do the same thing. Where I am poisonous until the spores are ready. Then go to town.
That's a much harsher chef.
Yes.
It's not ready yet, it'll taste bad, versus it's not ready yet, I'll kill you.
Yes, absolutely. Don't you dare. Some toxins are triggered by damage, much like in plants. If something starts chewing on this fungus, it'll start releasing toxins. Some fungi, speaking of weird chemical things that they do and defenses, some fungi are bioluminescent. There are glowing mushrooms. This one I've actually seen hypotheses in both directions, because on the one hand, glowing makes you easier to find.
Yes.
And so it's been suggested that in some cases the glowing might be there to attract predators. Come over here, my spores are ready, and eat this. But it's also been pointed out that some animals might be deterred by the light.
Yes.
That especially like little invertebrates that avoid light because they want to stay underground where it's safe. Or it might just be overwhelming to the senses of some, especially if you're a tiny little creature and it's just a giant glowing thing.
Well, and if you're in a dark place like cave systems and stuff where you might be one of the only sources of light here, that could be, everyone else is not adapted to go toward light.
Yes. And actually, fruiting bodies are known to be bioluminescent, but mycelium in some species
really
is also known to glow.
I didn't know that. That's very cool.
So that is another, like, your mycelium you typically are going to protect because that isn't valuable if it gets eaten. That's not spore dispersing. So yeah, I can totally understand that if you're a worm or something that is hardwired to stay where it's dark, and suddenly there's something glowing, you turn around, you go the other way.
Absolutely, yeah. That's just while you're moving underground, you suddenly come across light. You don't know that's not the surface.
Yes.
That's cool.
So, and that was an angle that I hadn't considered, because while I was putting these notes together, I was like, yeah, mushrooms glow. And I wondered this before. Why do mushrooms glow?
Well, so that you can see your way around the underground levels.
So that you can, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that you can find your way through the dungeon. And we talked, episode 157 was about bioluminescence and biofluorescence, where we talked about a bunch of potential functions of it. And it never used to make sense to me that mushrooms would glow until I realized that A, some mushrooms want to be eaten, and B, not all animals are attracted to light.
Yes.
Some animals avoid light.
Yeah. Very, very cool.
So there's all sorts of cool stuff to be said about fungivorous and mycophagous animals. Suffice it to say, there are tons of ways that fungi interact with animals in which the fungus is just being eaten by the animal, often helping to disperse spores. Now, I would be remiss if I did not spend at least a little bit of time talking about when the tables are turned.
This is one of my favorites.
There are carnivorous fungi.
Yeah.
There are fungi that eat, basically, that kill and devour small animals.
It's so cool.
Much like carnivorous plants, episode 105, these tend to attract small animals, and then they will trap them and then extract nutrients from them. In the case of fungi, this is often things like springtails, nematodes, like truly microscopic animals.
Yes.
Like carnivorous plants, these often live in environments where certain resources are not available, like low nitrogen environments where you need to supplement. A lot of things become carnivores when you need to supplement your nutrients.
Well, it's, as we've talked about before, eating prey is very efficient because the prey gather nutrients.
Yes.
And they become little loot caches.
A little pack
of nutrition. So if you can get another animal in your body, that is the most efficient way to get the nutrients you're needing.
Fungi tend to hunt, as it were, with their hyphae.
Yes.
So they're thread-like filaments. They will form into columns or knobs or loops, often with adhesive chemicals.
Okay.
They're sticky. And a nematode or something will go up next to it and then get stuck to it. Sundews and a lot of carnivorous plants do this. The animal gets stuck. It can't move. Eventually it's going to die. The fungal cells penetrate the animal tissues and extract nutrients from it. Most famously, at least the ones that I always think of, there are fungi that grow loops in their hyphae that are highly sensitive and capable of rapid movement.
Yes.
Like a Venus flytrap. And if a nematode or something crawls through the loop and bumps one of the sides, the loop constricts.
It's a noose.
It's a noose. It's a little snare.
A nematode noose.
That closes, apparently, so the way that it closes is the hyphae swell.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So like the tissues themselves actually thicken up to constrict what's inside. Apparently they will do this within a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
Like this is it's not quite a Venus flytrap snapshot.
Exactly.
But within a couple of seconds is pretty quick.
Yeah. Well,
and it's certainly quick enough that the nematode doesn't get away.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's fast enough that you could watch it happen.
Yes.
And
that you could blink. Like if you got something in your eye, you could blink and miss it.
Yes. That is notably that's faster than the fungi typically move.
Absolutely. This is also not a one-off thing. One source that I read said that there are estimated to be around 200 known species of carnivorous fungi across several different groups.
Wow.
This is not one type of fungus. This has evolved over and over again. Again, like carnivorous plants, this is a recurring strategy in fungi.
It's a great survival mechanism. It's just so cool. Like carnivorous plants is weird enough. It both is less weird and just as or more weird with fungi.
Yes.
I'm not surprised you're doing this, but it's also the way you're doing it is so much weirder.
Yeah, well, because in one sense, it makes a whole lot of intuitive sense because fungi already are breaking down organic matter.
Absolutely, exactly.
You already eat organic stuff.
Yeah.
Usually it's dead stuff, and usually you dig into it and then drink up the nutrients. But evolutionarily, it makes a whole lot of sense to go, well, yeah, but if I had like a little trap and I could keep the nutrients from getting away from me, then great. That is extremely beneficial.
Yeah, it's just cutting out the wait time.
But fungi, as we keep emphasizing, are so inconspicuous in their environment. We don't think about fungi existing the way that we think about plants and animals. They also don't have a body
That's exactly
facilitates this intuitively.
Yes.
It's like, no, you're made of thread as well. Yeah, how do you make thread deadly? either you make it like a spider web
Mm-hmm.
and it's sticky and now stuff can't get off of it, or you wrap it around something.
Tie someone up.
You tie something up, and that's what fungi do.
And that's the part that makes it so strange, is I think if you said to people who weren't familiar with it, there are carnivorous fungi
Right.
that eat animals.
You're going to picture like a mushroom.
A Venus fly mushroom.
Yes, exactly.
That is somehow capturing things. It's like, nope, murder thread in the ground.
Yes.
That's what they're doing. The mushrooms, the fruiting bodies they produce, normal fruiting bodies.
Yep.
Unseeable microscopic thread in the ground are capturing microscopic animals by
Yes.
probably the bajillions.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just happening under your feet all over the place. And that's a carnivorous plant, quote unquote, still has a mouth a lot of the time. Like pitcher plants and Venus flytraps
Yes.
have a mouth.
You can see where the nutrients go.
I get it. I do that same thing. I put things in my gullet.
This is relatable.
Yeah, well, this is so...
Yeah.
This is like, be
if I just-
careful in the dirt.
This is like-
some of it will eat you.
If I held a piece of steak in my hand
Yeah.
and got the nutrients from it
Yeah.
that way.
And it's just
If I grabbed a squirrel,
Yes.
around the neck and
Yes.
just held on to it until I got all the nutrients out
and
of
it's just
it.
some of the dirt in here will eat you.
Yes.
Be careful.
I also don't know how, and this is not something that I looked into, how many traps a single fungus will have.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, is this a mycelial body that has 20 or 30 of these loops in it? That I don't know, actually.
And I wouldn't be surprised if it varies. Like, if it's one of those where it depends on how much nutrients.
Yeah. And it depends on how common nematodes
Yeah, exactly.
are.
Like, if the nutrients is super low in this soil, lots of traps.
Yes.
If it's not, a few traps. So I could see it being extremely variable.
You will be delighted to hear, if you did not already know this, that carnivorous fungi are not only known from modern species.
Oh, I didn't know this.
There is a piece of amber from the early Cretaceous of France that is about 100 million years old that has a fungus inside it called Paleonellus that consists of mycelium with loops of hyphae. The threads form little loops, and there are bits of dirt and sediment stuck to the loops that suggest it had sticky secretions on it, like we see in carnivorous fungi today. Now, the paper that described this noted there are several nematodes preserved in the amber close by. They are not in the loops, but the diameter of the loops is about the right size compared to the diameter of the nematodes.
Yes.
So these very feasibly could have been trapping those nematodes.
That's so cool.
So we do have seemingly carnivorous fungi. Apparently there are also other trapping fungi known from amber from the Cenozoic.
Okay.
I saw reference to Oligocene and Miocene examples. So there are at least a handful of examples of what appear to be ancient carnivorous fungi.
That's so awesome. Like, once again, not surprising. Like,
Yeah.
since you've been on land, other things have been on land, and so of course you could have started eating them. But
Well, and it's a very simple thing to develop.
Yes.
That is an extremely easy thing to imagine the steps. Fungi already grow in threads.
Yep.
Their mycelium can already grow into larger structures or circles or knobs or whatever, and they already secrete chemicals.
yes,
Like,
you're already evolved to penetrate
Yeah.
cells and bodies that you were going to decompose.
all that it would take to evolve these trapping structures is extra sticky chemicals.
Yeah, which
and now you've done it.
sticky stuff that is super.
I produce sticky stuff.
Yep.
That's extremely easy.
And with something when you're on that scale, it doesn't need to be super glue. It
You
just
just need to catch an nematode.
yeah, viscous even can, like, if you have the surface tension right, that's all you need for it to be too much for this little thing to get away.
Yep.
That's so awesome.
So our world is absolutely full of animals eating fungi, And it is also surprisingly common that there are fungi eating animals.
I did not know it was that numerous.
Yeah, it's a bunch. It has happened quite a bit. Now, obviously, fungi feed on animals all the time because rot is that, right?
Yes.
Decomposition, fungi are getting into animal tissues. But these are the cases of fungi trapping living animals.
Yeah, these are anglers.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to move on from the topic of trophic feeding relationships to discuss other things. In the second half of this discussion, the relationships between fungi and animals are going to start to be much less beneficial for the animals.
A little bit more one-sided.
A little bit more one-sided. Much like in the previous episode where we talked about fungi and plants, we've got a whole lot to say about parasites and pathogens and other symbiotic relationships. Stay tuned. At this point, we have discussed at length that there are fungi everywhere. There are fungus in the ground. There are fungi in the soil, fungi in the water, fungi in the plants. There are also fungi in you.
Hey!
This is one of the most prominent symbiotic relationships between animals and fungi, is that fungi are part of our gut flora.
Yeah.
So this is something we've talked about on the podcast before. Most animals, maybe all animals, have a microbe ecosystem inside our guts, our stomachs, our intestines, that helps to break down food. There are certain foods we would struggle immensely to digest if we didn't have these microbes living in there. Many vertebrates and arthropods, one of those things that, the long list of things that we share with arthropods, have various fungi inside our gut flora, including yeasts, true yeasts, Saccharomycetes, and a group that's common in there called trichomycetes. These help with digestion, and as we have emphasized in these episodes, fungi are really good at breaking down plant tissues.
Yes.
So having fungus in our guts is part of what allows us to eat plants.
Yeah. Like, just the acid in your stomach is not actually enough to handle a planty diet.
Yes. Cellulose is just so hard.
It is tough
to break. That's the job.
Yes.
Right? That's why plants are so good at planting.
So you need chemical engineers.
Yes.
Little
and
microscopic ones to do the job.
This is one of the things fungi do best, is breaking down plant material. Now, I don't have a ton to say about gut flora, but I did want to mention it. I also don't have a ton to say about fossils of gut flora because that's hard to find.
Yep.
But I do have one thing to say about fossils of gut flora. There is a fossil known from Triassic sediments in Antarctica. The fossil is just a little piece of nothing that has been interpreted as potentially being a piece of arthropod cuticle. So like a part of the body wall of an arthropod. So just like a little scrap of the wall. The inner surface is covered in little fungal structures that are similar to certain gut fungi, that are the structures they use to anchor themselves inside the gut. So this might potentially be a chunk of the wall of an arthropod, and the inside of the wall has these little fungi on it, which could be fossil gut fungi.
That's pretty cool.
Which is pretty cool. I'm sure there are other potential explanations for that.
Yes.
But there are similarities enough, at least, that someone wrote a paper about it and said this looks like gut fungi. So that might exist. That's super cool.
Nice.
But most of the time that we talk about fungi inside our bodies, it is less cool and fun and beneficial than that.
Yep.
Fungi are extremely common as parasites. We talked about that in the last episode. There are tons of plant parasites that are fungi. We have mentioned in these episodes a few times there are fungal parasites of fungi. There are also lots of parasites of animals.
Yep.
These can be internal parasites inside the body. They can be on the outside. They can be a minor nuisance to full-on deadly infections. These are extremely varied. Fungal parasites often spread via contact. So it might be that two animals come into contact with each other and spread these parasites. They can transfer via an intermediate host, including plants can sometimes be a host for these parasites. And sometimes they just release spores from the body into the air or into the water. Fungal parasites are especially common in insects and other arthropods. In the most famous cases of fungal infections, the fungus can end up overtaking the entire body of the host.
Yeah.
A lot of the times it's just, no, there's a parasite in there, it's maybe causing some troubles. When you poop, there's some spores, and now someone else might get infected by those spores.
That's how it usually is for us, is like athlete's foot.
Absolutely.
You are infected by a fungus, it's not going to reach your brain, it's not going to reach it. I've had one that's in between my fingers that every now and then flares up, and the only treatment really is just dry it out, and it remits. But yeah, get little rash there.
I've got like a scalp thing sometimes that is just like, there's a fungus up there that acts up sometimes, and I have to put special shampoo on there.
And that's usually it.
Yes. There are fungi that just fully take over and devour.
Body snatch.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will see, what will happen is an insect will get infected, and then it'll die, and then just fruiting bodies grow out of it to release their spores.
It's just full of fungus now.
The famous fungal example of this is cordyceps.
Cordyceps!
Congratulations, we have made it. We are 5/6 of the way into our fungal trilogy. We're finally talking about cordyceps. Cordyceps is a type of fungus that will infect an insect, take over the body, grow all over it, and then release fruiting bodies right off the carcass.
Yes.
It doesn't bother to do like what Pilobolus does, where it comes out in the poop. This insect body is now the foundation for my mushroom, my fruiting body.
So you just get this structure exploding out of a carcass.
Sometimes it's a structure that comes out. Other times it fully overtakes the whole body of the insect. I actually saw one paper that noted that studying these kinds of fungi can be really difficult because often when you find them, the insect host is unidentifiable.
Yeah.
So you can't tell what species it infected because you can't see it anymore. Some of these release spores into the air. Some of them, the fruiting bodies, produce sticky spores so that if another bug passes by, the spores get on there. Cordyceps is known to, it'll get ants and grasshoppers and stuff. Cordyceps is also known to infect spiders. Particularly, I saw it discussed with ground-dwelling spiders. That sometimes you will see fungal stalks coming out of the ground, and underneath there is the burrow of a ground-dwelling spider. And that spider is no longer alive. They push up out of the ground.
That's like a scene from a movie.
Would you like to quickly explain to everybody what trapdoor spiders do?
Yeah! Trapdoor spiders they're in the same overall group as like tarantulas and stuff. They're ground-dwelling spiders, often a bit beefier and larger, and they will dig burrows and then weave a silk covering, and I think sometimes they'll incorporate sediment into so that it's this trapdoor on a lid to the burrow. And then they have webs that come out from it that are their sensors or their tripwires. And anyone that comes close enough, they dart out, grab it, and pull their prey back down into the burrow.
The door, it's not hinged, but it acts like a hinge.
Yeah, I think it often is like webbed on one side.
Yeah,
so it
exactly.
is hinged to a degree. So it flops in one direction, and they just pop out, grab things, and then hide back down.
One reference that I read mentioned a case where fungi had infected a trapdoor spider and the fungal tissues had pushed open the trapdoor as they grew out of the burrow.
Oh, that's so wrong.
And there are pictures of it in that paper of these like mycelial cords just coming out of the trapdoor.
That's awesome.
It's so cool.
That's like coming up on someone's house and there's just vines and mycelium coming out their front door.
Yes.
Oh.
So cool. Some fungi, the genus Strongwellsia is known to do this. They will infect flies and grow a fungal body, basically, on the fly. The fly lives, and the body releases spores as it flies around. So it instead of getting eaten by something that flies, you're just hanging on the outside and releasing spores.
Just raining them down.
Just raining spores around. And some fungi are famous for not only taking advantage of the behavior of their hosts, but manipulating the behavior of their hosts. These are some of the most famous examples. The most famous example is a genus called Ophiocordyceps.
Yes.
When you think cordyceps, this is the one you're thinking of. Ophiocordyceps will infect ants and other arthropods. As the fungus develops in the body, it starts to interfere with the hormones and the nervous system to alter the behavior of the bug. The bug then consistently will crawl up to some high up place, usually underneath a leaf, sometimes just up on a tall trunk or stem, and then dies.
Yep.
Dies there in that position, and then soon afterwards, fruiting bodies grow out of the bug's body and release spores.
Yes.
So the bug crawls up somewhere high where the spores have a great vantage point.
Yeah, to an optimum dispersal height.
Yes. And then the bug dies and the fruiting bodies grow and release the spores. This is the planet Earth example with the ant with the spore, the sporangia growing out of the back of its head like a horror movie.
Yeah.
The fungus, this infection, this manipulation of behavior will often cause the bug to do what's called a death grip.
Yes.
In animals like ants, it's with the mandibles. They will crawl up onto the underside of a leaf or on a stem and clamp down on it with the mandibles so that they can't fall off and then die.
Yeah, and there's a true facts that goes over a whole bunch of these cool parasitic fungi, and they show images of the jaw muscles of an infected ant, and that the mycelium is in the muscle. So it's controlling the muscle directly, which is why they continue to hold on after they die.
Yeah. Apparently other insects like grasshoppers will grasp on with their legs.
Makes sense.
Same thing. Some fungi, this part I didn't know, some fungi will create hyphal structures to anchor the bug to the plant.
Whoa!
That the fungus actually participates in this death grip.
It's venom grabbing him back to the motorcycle.
It straps them down
Whoa!
onto the plant.
That's intense.
The death grip behavior is seen apparently in at least 2 separate lineages of fungi. Wow. This is not a one-off. This has evolved multiple times. Cool. This is one of the famous, and this is also the one where, like, certain ant species, if they notice one of the ants is infected, they will take it out of the colony.
Yeah.
To somewhere where it's far enough away that it won't infect them when the spores come out.
Yep. Because like sometimes it'll cause them to like stumble or act slightly off, and they will excommunicate that ant so that hopefully when it does fruit, it's far enough away that it doesn't infect the rest of the colony.
Listeners, if this is news to you, go look up cordyceps on YouTube.
It's so
be ready.
Yes.
It's it's planet Earth.
Yeah.
It's not like, super gory or gross or anything.
It is grisly and beautiful at the same time.
Yes.
It's really some sci-fi like abstract art type stuff.
Another famous example that is not too dissimilar from this, and this is one that we talked about in episode 190 about cicadas.
Yep.
This is a fungus called Massospora, which infects cicadas. It specifically, I believe this one infects the periodical cicadas.
Yes.
The multi-year cicadas. It breaks down the abdomen and replaces it with fungal tissues.
Yep.
So the butt of the insect is just fungus.
And yeah, so like ones you will see look like half a cicada almost.
Yep.
And just have this spore body sticking off the back.
But the cicada's still alive and
Yep.
it still functions, so they fly around, they can infect other cicadas that way. The fungus in some cases will even induce mating behaviors so that the cicada will try to mate with other cicadas, and when it rubs up against another cicada, it spreads the spores.
It's just the worst STI.
Oh, just extremely creepy parasitic behavior. So cool. There are parasitic fungi in the fossil record. I will list a couple of examples. There's a case in Baltic amber from the Eocene of a springtail, so these are little insects, covered in aspergillus fungus. The authors noted that, now again, like we said before, it's hard to tell, did this fungus grow all over this insect from an infection, or did the insect die and then fungus grew on it because it's decomposing it? In this case, they noted that the springtail is quite well preserved, so not decomposed very much, and there are no other notable decomposers on the body. So, because if it was just decomposing, you'd expect it to be a smorgasbord. Yes. Any decomposers come in. So they think this is most likely a parasitic relationship.
Yeah, you died, and very quickly after dying, these sprouted.
Yeah, this fungus was already prepared to create these fruiting bodies.
Yes.
Other examples in Miocene amber include at least one example of a spider with mycelium on it, an ant covered in spores, a gnat with fungus growing on it. A 2009 study described early Cretaceous turtle eggs that had hyphae and spores inside at least one of the eggs.
Whoa!
And they noted that most likely what happened here is that the egg got damaged.
Yeah.
And then it got infected by this fungus.
Cool.
So we do have fungal parasites in the fossil record, but of course the best one, and I know I've mentioned this one on the podcast before, is a fossil from Myanmar amber, early Cretaceous, 100 million years old, of a fungus called Paleoophiocordisceps. This is a piece of amber with a scale insect in there. Scale insects are, I believe they're hemiptera. They're true bugs.
I think
the
so.
Same group as cicadas and stuff. I think that's true. But it's a bug. It's a little like plant dwelling bug. And on this bug in amber, emerging from its, I believe its head, are two long fungal structures, two big long stalks covered in spores.
Oh.
That's just cordyceps. That's just what Ophiocordyceps does.
Straight up out of a documentary.
From the early Cretaceous. That this is dinosaurs could have walked under a leaf that had a bug on it with fungal stalks growing out of its head.
Well, it's so cool that, like, not only have they been doing it a long time, but, like, just the list of different kinds of invertebrate, like, arthropods you've listed, it runs just the gamut. Everyone has some form of fungus coming for them.
That particular one, the Paleoophiocordisceps, at least at the time it was described, which I think was in the last decade or so, was cited as the oldest fossil evidence of animal parasitism by a fungus.
Oh, hey, cool.
And you'll enjoy this one. A 2011 study examined a single fossil leaf from the Messel Pit, episode 160. This is an Eocene fossil site, so this is just a preserved leaf. They noted that along the veins of the leaf were 29 scars.
Wow.
That match the appearance of death grip marks left by ants infected by Ophiocordyceps today.
That's so many.
That this is a leaf that seems to have been death gripped at some point.
Awesome. That's way more than I would have expected.
Yeah, by all. Well, and I do wonder if was there a mass infection and a bunch of them crawled up there? Was this the leaf that grew closest to that colony, and it was just the one that they ended up going up on very often? Yep.
Like, I'd never thought about a leaf getting potentially reused in this way. That's very cool.
So, not only do carnivorous fungi potentially go as far back as the Cretaceous, but also mind-controlling zombie fungi also go as far back as the Cretaceous. So that's super fun and cool.
It's so awesome. It is... All the aspects of these fungi are just so horror movie and delightful in that regard of not only are you infecting this animal and killing it, but you're controlling its behavior and altering its behavior. And then when you spore, it's not like you just eat some of the body and you just replace this organism with your body and your fruiting bodies.
Yes, which then produces more spores.
Yes.
To go infect the colony that this insect came from.
Yeah, it's
because you positioned yourself above the colony.
Yes.
And now you're just dropping spores onto them.
It's just, it has that feeling of like, have you seen George? Like, I don't know, he wandered off. And then
you
camera pans up to George hanging in the rafters, breathing out spores.
And I think that what's so impressive about it is that it's complex and it's dramatic, but it's also brutally efficient.
Yes.
Like, it is an extremely, like, from the perspective of the fungus, this makes all the sense.
Yes.
Infect a bug, move it to a beneficial position, kill it, grow, use the body to fuel your fruiting bodies, drop spores back down, and then they can infect more bugs. It is so straightforward and so efficient and so callous isn't the right, I don't want to, we're not ascribing
morals.
Yeah, exactly. But it is extremely merciless for the bug.
Yes.
Right? The bug gets infected. It's like, cool, you work for the fungus now. Move on up here to where you will help me to best infect all of your friends. Cool, you're done. You can die. Time for fruiting bodies. It's very, like, it's beautiful in its efficiency, and it's also kind of scary in its efficiency.
It also just, a bit of a feather in the cap of arthropods. They have just such hardcore parasites, because, like, we talked about it here, we also talked about parasitoid wasps.
Yeah.
Both have categories of, like, for basically every group of insects in arthropod, there is a fungus that targets them. There's also a wasp that wants to lay its eggs in you.
Yes.
It's like, so just...
Well, and we talked about that one fungus that gets in the wasp's ovipositors.
Yes.
And I don't know
if that's ever
if it
paired
is
up.
known if there are fungi that pair up with parasitoid wasps.
I mean...
But, like, there are so many parasitoid wasps, I would kind of be shocked.
It would make... Because there are ones that pair up with a virus. Like, a lot of the parasitoid wasps that do the mind controlling... The mind controlling is done by a virus that lives in the ovipositor.
Yes.
So, like, that's not that much of a stretch. Yeah. Man.
It's awesome.
Little bugs, good job surviving.
Well, to bring us to lighter discussion, in addition to being parasites, fungi also cause a lot of diseases.
Yes.
Fungi can be pathogens. Now, where's the line between pathogen and parasite? Meh. But some things we call diseases. So let's talk about that. Fungi are responsible for lots of diseases and infections, particularly in humans. A lot of our diseases and infections are fungal. Here's some examples. Histoplasmosis is a lung infection. That's one. I think that one comes out of, like, poop and stuff. I think that's the one you get from, like, cat poop and things like that. Yeast infections are skin infections that can happen on various different parts of the body. Athlete's foot, which you mentioned before, also a skin infection. Ringworm is a fungal, not a worm. It's called ringworm because it makes a rash that is shaped like a ring. It's another skin infection. A lot of these are fungi that are normally living in or on the body. Like, our bodies are full of fungus. You cannot help that. And if you did get rid of them, you'd have trouble eating and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So these are often opportunistic pathogens. This is also true of a lot of bacteria in our bodies, that they're kind of always there, but then if our body is having trouble at some point, if we get a little sick or a little sleep deprived or a little malnourished, they get the opportunity to start growing out of control, and it starts to cause us problems.
There was just a week before we're recording this, a Kurzgesagt about a fairly recent discovery is that we also have a virome of viruses that are part of our inner culture. And a lot of them are, like, controlling the populations of the bacteria that live in us to keep them at manageable levels. But there are ones that can turn good bacteria into dangerous bacteria.
Oh, yeah.
And those can become a disease because the virus introduced new DNA that allowed the bacteria to do things it couldn't do. And now it can go from something that was harmless or helpful to now deadly.
Remember last episode where we were talking about how we think of lichens as being a symbiotic relationship, but actually, like, all trees are that too, because we think of it as being a tree, but actually there's fungus in the roots and in the leaves and stuff.
Yep.
Us too.
Yep. We're all fungus.
When fungi become pathogenic, they tend to grow and spread, and what they do is they start damaging stuff.
Yeah.
Right? It starts damaging the skin, or it'll damage the lungs. Often this is just an irritant. Right? It makes your skin itchy.
Yes.
Or it, makes you cough or something. In some cases, fungal infections can get bad enough that they start to severely interfere with the body's functioning. We're not going to go into a whole bunch of detail on fungal diseases here because A, I don't wanna, and also B, that is a little bit outside the scope of what we want to cover.
Yeah.
However, I do want to take a little bit of time here to focus on prominent examples of fungal diseases in wildlife.
Yes.
Because fungi also are responsible for certain diseases in other species. There are tons of these. We could talk about this, for hours and hours. But there are a handful that will get singled out as emerging diseases of considerable concern. I'm going to mention 3 of them. The first one, and maybe the most famous wildlife disease in the world currently, is chytridiomycosis.
Mm-hmm.
Chytridiomycosis is a disease in amphibians, frogs, salamanders. I assume Sicilians get it too, although I don't know off the top of my head. It is caused by a fungus called Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis, or BD. This is a chytrid. So in the first episode, we talked about different groups of fungi. Chytrids are the ones that reproduce with little sperm cell-like spores. Chytridiomycosis is waterborne. So you get it in the water, which, if you're going to infect amphibians, that's a great place to do it.
Yep.
Chytridiomycosis is a skin infection. It causes thickening in the skin. It can interfere with feeding and shedding. It can also interfere with respiration, with breathing, because amphibians do so much of their breathing through their skin. Chytridiomycosis is extremely famous because it is known everywhere. It was first identified in Australia in 1993 after a mass mortality event among several frog species. So researchers noticed, a bunch of frogs died all around the same time. They identified this disease. It is now known on every continent on the planet, except for Antarctica. My notes say except Australia, which is obviously a typo. Except Antarctica. It has been identified as infecting over 350 different species of amphibians, especially severe among frogs, and around 200 species of amphibians are known to have suffered declines or extinction because of this fungal infection.
Wow.
It has been called one of the most significant losses of biodiversity due to disease in recorded history.
Yeah.
This is a big, we've been hearing about chytridiomycosis for the last couple of decades. This is a big deal disease that is spread all across the world. Research in particular notes that it is still unknown how widespread the impacts of this disease are. It's spread around the world, and its sort of increased virulence might be linked to the fact that fungi, like a lot of pathogens, do better in warmer temperatures. Mm-hmm. And so it's very possible that the spread of this infection is linked to the fact that the world is getting warmer. I don't have a nice little button on the end of that with hope.
Yeah.
There is hope. People are researching this, and there's a lot of people who are dedicated to figuring this out.
Well,
and
I've
what
seen
to do
things
about
about inoculating populations. There's ways you can immunize a batch of frogs to it, and then release programs trying to introduce them to pond populations. So there are ways to fight it. But just, it's on such a large scale, and you're dealing with wild sick animals, not ones you can actually go take care of easily, so it's much harder to maintain and track.
So chytridiomycosis, massively significant emerging wildlife disease that happens to be fungal. Another one here in North America, another perhaps the second most famous emerging fungal disease among wildlife, is white nose syndrome.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be one of
Yep.
these two when you first said it. Yep.
White nose is an infection that affects bats. It's known here in North America. It is caused by a fungus named Pseudogymnoascus destructans. I assume that it's an ascomycete. I don't think that I've written that down here, but it's Pseudogymnoascus, so that sounds like it's an ascomycete.
Mm-hmm.
White nose is a disease that, again, it's a skin infection, and it infects bats during hibernation. While they're hibernating, they get infected. Sometimes the fungus will grow as white fuzz on parts of the body, sometimes on the face, which is where the name white nose comes from. This can be a problem for the bats because it can interrupt their hibernation.
Yes.
It can wake them up. It can cause them to be active at abnormal times. Like they'll come flying out during the day or in the middle of the winter or something, which is bad for them.
Yeah.
Like they're not getting the rest and recovery that they need. They're also putting themselves in danger.
Yeah.
White nose was first identified here in North America in 2007 in New York. It's thought that it was possibly brought over from Europe, that this exists in Europe, but it's not
Pandemic.
yeah, exactly. It's not a plague in Europe the way that it is here. At some sites, some bat hibernacula, white nose has been known to cause mortality of between 90% and 100% of the population.
Yeah.
There are populations of bats in North America that have been completely wiped out by white nose.
Yep.
At least a dozen known species have been confirmed with white nose. It's been detected in most U.S. states. And this is why, if you live in a part of the country like we do, like we live in the mountains, there's lots of caves here. A lot of caves have been closed over the last decade or so to try to stop people from accidentally spreading this disease, because the spores can get on your clothes or on your hair or your body or something, and then if you go into another cave, you might be spreading that fungus around.
Yeah. It's very similar to why it's encouraged that you disinfect like dive gear before moving places, because you might transmit things. And like you need to disinfect your gear before you move from cave environment to cave environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, again, fungi do better in warmer temperatures.
Yep.
So that is a growing concern. And then I'll mention one more. Do you know what the third one is?
I don't know the name, but I know, I think I know where we're going with it.
This is snake fungal disease.
That's a very... I should have guessed that name.
Yeah, you should have known it was coming.
I was going to say it's the fungus on the snakes.
Yeah, this one doesn't have like a fancy name to it. It's just called SFD. It's just snake fungal disease.
That's very, very efficient.
The fungus is Ophidiomyces ophidiocola. This is a snake infection. This is another one here in North America. This is another one that has been becoming more prominent in the last couple of decades. Ophidiomyces is typically a saprotrophic fungus, so it lives in the soil. This is a pathogenesis of that fungus. It is, again, a skin infection, but in snakes that also means it's a scales infection.
Yeah.
So it can cause crusty skin and scales, especially on the face. It can lead to swelling around the eyes and throat. It can interfere with shedding. And it can cause pneumonia, apparently, in snakes. This was first identified in the U.S. in a population of timber rattlesnakes in New Hampshire in 2006 that suffered a 50% population loss because of this disease. And then in 2008, 2 years later, a population of Massasaugas, pygmy rattlesnakes in Illinois, suffered a 100% mortality. And this population of rattlesnakes died off completely.
Whoa, I did not know it was that bad.
Yep. Since then, snake fungal disease has been confirmed in at least 16 states and Ontario, up in Canada, not just here in the US, and in several different species of snakes. This is another one that is expected to continue to spread, especially as temperatures get warmer.
Yeah.
So these are a couple of examples. These are not like happy examples, but this drives home the significance of fungi as disease-causing agents. Fungi are not only like occasionally pathogens, they are responsible for some of the more significant the significant infections and diseases, not only in humans but in wildlife.
Yeah. Well, and one of the examples this made me think of that's I think can drive it home for lots of people is like black mold. There's a reason we freak out when they find black mold in someone's house or in a building, and I don't think that one's an infectious type thing. I think it's just the spores, breathing those in, damage the lungs.
Yeah,
like,
I don't think that sounds right.
I don't think they take root, quote unquote. Sure. They don't take hyphae in the lung. It's just that they're producing spores, and those spores happen to be bad for us to breathe in because of their makeup and their composition.
Yes.
So it's like even just they can cause secondary ailments, and that's one that I like. When I hear people talk about it, it's treated like asbestos, where it's like,
yeah.
You have black mold? Get out of there.
Well, and that's why I wanted to bring up, especially chytridiomycosis and white nose, because those are famous.
Yes.
I'm sure many of our listeners have heard, especially white nose syndrome if you live here in the U.S.
Absolutely.
Chytridiomycosis, if you pay attention to sort of wildlife ecology and stuff, is talked about quite a lot. So those are very much the same way as when I get to say, this infection in human, ringworm, that's a fungus. Yeah, white nose, that's a fungus.
Yeah.
Chytridiomycosis, that's a fungus. Snake fungal disease, obviously. So fungi are extremely efficient at being parasitic. They're extremely efficient at being pathogens and causing disease.
Because, like, very much like you made the point with them being predatory of, it's very much the same job. You're growing in tissue, you're feeding on tissue. Now you're just doing it.
Yeah, now the tissue's just moving around.
The tissue's just still functioning, but it's really not that much different than growing on a section of log. You're just growing on a section of an animal. Yes. And sometimes the animal cannot handle that.
So there are tons of ways that fungi exploit animals. There are ways that animals exploit fungi. There are ways that fungi take advantage of animals' mobility for dispersal and all that sort of stuff. There is one more topic that I want to make sure we talk about, and to lighten the discussion, let's talk about when fungi and animals work together toward the same goal. We are, at long last, almost at the end of our third episode of the trilogy, going to talk about fungus farming.
Yay!
Fungus farming, one of the coolest things that exists in the world. There are 3 groups of organisms that are known to make fungus farms. 4 groups, technically, if you include humans.
Yes.
Like, we also cultivate fungi. But fungus farming in nature is something that certain insects do, where they will actually make fungal gardens. This is known in ants, it's known in termites, and it is known in beetles.
The beetles is the one I did not know about.
Same.
Yeah.
I learned about that here. Yeah, I said 3 and Will started thinking. Yeah. I could see it.
It took me
ants,
a second.
Termites, and beetles.
You mentioned that like a little, couple weeks ago or something when we were doing something else.
I think it was on Spooky.
Yeah. And I had a moment of, what?
Yep. Yep.
What?
All 3 of these share certain features. They make fungal gardens inside their nests, so just a place where a bunch of fungus grows. All of them will bring food to the fungus. They will drop off food and fertilizer on the fungal garden. They also will remove parasites.
Yeah.
So if there's like a bug in there eating the fungus, or if there's a weed fungi in there, they will pull them out to protect the garden. These insects all eat the fungus, right? They're much like how we garden, they're growing this so they can eat it. In all of these cases, typically the larvae eat the fungus as an important part of their diet growing up.
Yes.
That the fungus is an important food for the young insects. Often the garden where the fungus is grown is where the larvae are kept.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's where you raise the larvae. And typically, the fungi that grow in these gardens are only known from these gardens. They don't grow elsewhere. This is where they grow. They grow when this species of ant or termite is taking care of them. Let's go through all 3 of the groups that do this, because they all do it in slightly different ways.
Yay.
Ants that farm fungi all belong to a subgroup of ants called Attini. There are about 200 species of them that are fungus farmers. They make fungal gardens in their underground chambers. Most of them collect dead plant material to bring into the fungus. So they're collecting bits of wood and bits of leaves. The famous exception to that are leafcutter ants.
Yeah.
Leafcutter ants actually cut off bits of living leaves
Yes.
to then bring them to the garden. Listeners, I'm sure you've seen images or videos of leafcutter ants, which will like carry around chunks of leaf in like these long lines to bring them back to their fungal garden. Most fungus farming ants, their nests are fairly small. There's a few dozen workers or so. Leafcutter ant colonies can number in the millions.
Yeah, they are one of the most like intense and complicated colonial ant societies there is.
Yes. The ants, notably, this is the super cool, unintuitive thing. The ants don't eat the plants that they're collecting.
Nope.
Leafcutter ants are going through tons of trouble to collect these leaves. They do not eat them. They bring them to the fungus grows, and the ants eat the fungus. The fungus actually grows special fruiting bodies for the ants to eat.
Which is so cool.
Which is this is true symbiotic. You are working together. You are doing things for each other.
Well, and I think that the ones that collect grass, I think also are fungus farmers, I believe. But I've seen them listed as one of the main herbivores in the environments
that they're quote grazers.
Yes,
because they are taking away the grass.
Like they are for animals that remove biomass from the lawn of nature.
Yes,
they're one of the biggest members of that, but they're actually taking it
they're not even eating it.
Yeah.
Fungus farming ants also, notably, on their body grow special bacteria that kills off invasive fungus in the garden. So obviously a fungal garden is a great place to be a fungus, so other fungi will get in there.
Yeah, there's all this great plant material to grow off of.
Absolutely. And the ants have pesticide. They have a biological agent on their body that they will rub off onto these invading fungi to kill them. So that they only keep the fungus that they want.
So cool.
This is why it's called farming.
Yes.
They are feeding, they are weeding and getting rid of invasives, and then they eat what is produced by their garden.
Yes.
The way that these spread is also very cool. So ants, reproductive cycle is a female is born and has wings and flies off to go form another colony. When that happens in these, before that reproducing female takes off, it will take a bit of the fungus.
Yeah.
And fly off, find a place, plant the fungus, and then start laying eggs and creating workers and stuff. So the colony grows as the fungus garden grows.
It's like chefs sharing their yeast cultures.
Yeah.
With new and upcoming chefs. It's so cool that they have to take a
cultivar.
And to found the new colony, like,
yes,
you need this. This is your flag.
Yeah, I plant my fungus in this soil.
That's so cool.
So there are about 200 species of ants that do that, all within the same group. Termites, I believe, are also one origin of fungus farming in termites. There are around 3,000 known species of fungus farming termites.
Whoa!
Termites are real good at it.
That's way more than I thought.
These are known throughout Africa and Asia. These are termites that build mounds.
Yeah.
So you think of those termite mounds in places like Africa and Asia. Within those mounds, they build a structure called a comb. And the comb is made of their poop, and fungi grow on the comb.
Yeah.
The termites do eat plants. So these are like the worker termites do actually eat the plants that they're collecting, and then they poop on the comb.
Yeah.
To add to the comb, and it also adds plant material from their poop. It also adds any spores that they might have collected.
Yeah.
Back into the fungal farm. And then this is another one, but their larvae feed on the fungus.
Yes.
So they are doing it a little bit less directly than the ants do it. There's a middle stage, and it is termite digestion.
Yeah.
So they are fertilizing. They are fertilizing the fungal garden.
Well, and that actually makes sense because when you said it was so common among them, I started to have that moment of like, but termites are one of the groups famous for being able to break down, like,
Yes.
they are especially good at being able to break down wood, which is a very hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of weird for...
Why would you outsource that to your fungal garden?
Why do you need this middle step to be able to eat this plant material? And it's... No,
And
you
they don't.
you flipped the direction, and that's fascinating.
Yep. And then there are ambrosia beetles. Ambrosia beetles are multiple groups of multiple lineages that are within weevils.
Mm-hmm.
So I think these are technically types of weevils. These create burrows in trees and create fungal gardens inside the trees.
Cool.
Inside their little burrow. Outside of that, it's very similar to the other two. They bring material, they fertilize the fungus, their larvae feed on the fungus. What is interesting about the beetles example is that fungus farming is monophyletic in both ants and termites,
Yes.
which means it evolved once. In beetles, there are 7 different lineages of beetles that do this.
Nice.
This has evolved repeatedly in beetles.
Are these eusocial beetles?
I don't know how, truly eusocial
Yeah.
they are, but they're certainly,
Colony?
colony-forming beetles.
Because I remember from doing the eusociality episode that there are eusocial beetles, and so I wasn't sure if these were also doing it in a similar way, or if there were, like, how there are solitary bees that make their own nest without a hive.
So a very quick dig to find some quick answers to this. It seems that not all of them
Cool.
are so it sounds like some of these might actually be just a beetle has a little garden, but at least one species is a eusocial beetle.
Yeah.
So it seems like both.
That makes sense because, like, there are eusocial beetles, as that obviously does, but, like, it is not the norm with beetles.
Yeah.
Like it is for termites and ants, which are wholly eusocial. But it makes sense with beetles that you have a spectrum of individual to eusocial gardeners.
It also sounds like they have been less studied than ants and termites in this regard.
Makes sense.
And I found less information about them. I think also, and I might be misremembering this, but I think that with the ants and termites, the fungi tend to be specific to those gardens, but with the beetles, it's less so.
Yeah.
That multiple species of fungi are in there, and they're fungi that can also be found in other places.
Yeah, it's not domesticated, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Fungal gardens are not only beneficial to the insects that maintain them. There are other fungi that are specialized parasites of insect fungal gardens.
What?
Like, there are fungi who, that's their specialty, is sneaking into fungal gardens that other animals have built. And I'm shocked that I managed to do this 3 times in this episode. 2 snake species are known to use leafcutter ant fungal gardens as egg nurseries.
Really?
At least one species of blind snake and a species of cat-eye snake, both of which are, I think, Central South American, will lay their eggs in these fungal gardens.
Cool.
I don't have any further information about that, but that's super cool.
It makes sense that could be a good place, because as long as you can make yourself protected and immune from that fungus,
Yep.
then the ants are going to make sure no other fungi or pathogens can get to those eggs.
Yeah, it's a protected space.
As long as you can handle the one fungus that's present, all the others are no longer a worry.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Now, fungus farming has been examined extensively, especially in ants and termites. The question of the evolution of fungus farming is really interesting. Right? Where did this come from? How did this get started? There is a fossil record of fungus farming, a little.
Cool.
There are fossilized termite combs.
Ah.
So the poop structure that they grow the fungus on. There are termite combs known from Africa and in both the early Jurassic and the Miocene. So early Jurassic,
Yeah.
almost 200 million years ago. Also, at least one record of termite combs is known from the late Cretaceous in Texas,
Oh.
which is not where you find them today, which is pretty cool. These combs are made up of microscopic fecal pellets, just like modern ones. There are also, in the Miocene record of Argentina, there are fossil ant nests that have the same structure as the nests of modern fungus farming ants. So it sounds like there isn't necessarily fungus preserved in there or a direct structure, but the shape and structure of the overall burrow
Yes.
is the same as what we see in modern fungus farming ants.
It's shaped like a fungus garden.
So those might very well also be ancient fungus farming ants.
Makes sense.
Those are the only fossil cases that I came across mentioned of potential fossil fungus farming. And if those are correct, then this has been going on for almost 200 million years.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Also, those fossil termite combs might be top contender for most interesting coprolite.
Those are some good coprolites. Those did not make it into our coprolites episode when we did it way back in episode 30, but they shoulda.
Yeah, that's very awesome.
I have seen some discussion of hypotheses of how fungus farming might have gotten started.
Yeah.
One suggestion is that it might have begun with fungi using insects as their dispersal agents. Like we were talking about before, getting the spores onto the animals or having them eat the fungus or something. And then that sort of morphed over time into the insects are also eating the fungus.
Yes.
And keeping the fungus. This has been suggested specifically for the ambrosia beetles because it's been noticed that the fungus that they farm is closely related to free-living fungi that often use insects for dispersal, and many beetles are important fungal dispersers.
Yes.
So these are fungi and beetles and insects that are already involved in this sort of animal fungal dispersal behavior. So that might be how that started.
I could also see that very easily connecting, especially with social insects that groom each other.
Oh, sure.
If you're covered in spores and I'm grooming you just for cleanliness, but now I like chimps grooming each other, I'm going to eat anything that's edible that comes off of you, and that just becomes a part of the diet.
Yeah. Cool. Now, with diet, that has also been suggested for termites, that it may have happened the other way. Termites eat wood, and wood is often infected by fungi. So it might be that that these were termites that adapted to eat fungi.
Yeah.
And then later started to manipulate the fungus, started to move it into certain places and take care of it. It's been noted that all of these bugs tend to live in places that fungi also like to live in. So it could have started with them living side by side, utilizing the same space, utilizing the same resources. So given that this has shown up 9 times at least in 7 groups of beetles and then ants and termites, it is very likely that it has multiple different origin paths.
Well, and I could, especially for like the termite situation where you're growing it off of your droppings. And as you mentioned, not only is that a way to fertilize the fungus, but also to deposit any spores that you ate.
If you're eating the fungus, you're putting fungus back there.
And like ants, and I assume termites, I don't know them as well, but like many ants have latrines.
Yep.
So this is where we go to the bathroom. Don't just go anywhere because we need to keep this place clean. We have babies here. And so you have a latrine, and then every now and then it sprouts fungal bodies.
Yep, and
you
that's
go,
food.
Oh, hey, I was just coming here to use the bathroom, but I'll have a snack. And then that just becomes very common. You know, those start to sync up. I can absolutely see how this could start by accident.
Yes, absolutely.
Or like with ants, they often have refuge piles. All right, we ate our food, throw the trash over there.
Yes, because trash can't stay in the middle of the nest.
Something yummy grew on some of the trash. Well, let's eat that.
Yes.
So like lots of ways that they could become associated.
Further insights into the potential evolution of fungus farming in animals come from the 2003 discovery of fungus farming in another group of organisms.
What? Nuh-uh.
Do you want to guess? You want to guess what type of animal has been discovered farming fungi?
Oh, no. Rodents were the first thing that came to mind.
Rodents is a good guess.
Yeah.
These are invertebrates.
Yes, but as I thought of that, I was like, no, probably not. No, not you. Mites.
Mites is a great guess. Not arthropods.
Oh.
There's a 2003 study that described fungal farming in snails.
Keep talking.
I will keep talking. These are marsh snails, Literaria irorate, which are grazers on cordgrass. So they live in salt marshes, and cordgrass is, plants that grow in the water. These snails are commonly found on the grass, grazing away. But research into the behavior of these snails found that they don't actually eat the grass. They use their radula, their little tongue, to scrape wounds into the leaves, and then they leave, and the wound on the leaf becomes infected by fungi, and then the snails eat that fungus.
No.
So they are opening up a space for fungal infection to start, and then they eat that. Now, that could be a coincidence.
Yes.
So the researchers did some experimental studies and found that if you have young snails of this species and you only feed them fresh leaves, they don't grow properly, and 50% of them died.
Whoa!
They need the fungus in order to develop properly.
Whoa!
The snails are also observed to poop on the damaged leaves, potentially adding fertilizer and also putting fungi back in there if they're eating the fungus. Now, the authors did note it is unclear whether the snails are going out of their way to poop on the leaves, or if it's just, you're hanging out here while you eat.
Yes.
And that's when you poop.
Yes.
So to what degree this is quote unquote intentional is unclear. This is a really interesting observation because this is, as the authors of this paper described it, low-level fungus farming.
Yes, exactly.
They're not maintaining a specific garden the way that the insects do. They're not weeding, as far as we can tell. They're not pulling out parasites. They're not bringing food to it. But they are making a space for fungus to grow. They are avoiding other potential sources of nutrients that they could be eating, like the plants, and their young need the fungus in order to develop properly.
Yeah.
This is a simple form of fungus farming.
Well, it's very much that step in between hunter-gatherer and full-blown farming, where it's you haven't set up a garden, but you drag logs back toward your home in the hopes that the right mushrooms will grow on it.
Yes.
You are hoping that nature will grow where you want it to grow so that you can benefit off of it, but you aren't cultivating it. I'd also be fascinated for how quickly between them creating the scratches and it growing, and are you returning to scratches you made, or is it more just a healthy population of snails will create enough scratches that you will find someone's...
And that I don't know. I don't remember if that was noted in the paper.
And I wouldn't be surprised if it's
hard to tell.
If it's hard to tell, and if it's that we don't know yet because we're still learning about this.
Yes.
But forget my limbed bias, but I don't think of snails as having a memory to note and speak of.
Remember where their leaf was?
So it seems like, is this just something that you do, and then... Yeah, if there's a healthy population of these snails...
You're terraforming your population.
Yes.
Or you're, cultivating your environment.
Yeah, there should be fungal growth.
You're engineering. That's it. You're engineering an environment where young snails can develop properly.
Absolutely. That there should be enough of these around that you'll be able to find one when you're hungry, and young ones will be able to find one when they need them.
Mm-hmm.
That's... very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting for two reasons. Mainly, one, because this is an interesting view on what an early stage of fungal farming might look like.
Mm-hmm.
But also, this is apparent fungal farming outside of insects.
Yes.
In marine environments.
Yes. Salt marshes.
Which suggests that this kind of behavior might be more common than we think that it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is like, when we look at, attine ant, we look at leafcutter ants, and it's like, I mean, that's so specific and so unusual. Only one group of animals has managed to do that. I can't imagine anybody else living that way. The way that these snails live, I can imagine most organisms doing something like that.
Well, and it doesn't require social organization.
Nope.
It doesn't require a home base.
Nope.
So all of those things mean that you can do it individually.
You don't even need to, bring food
Nope.
to them, because the food's already there.
You're already on the food.
Yep.
You don't need to bring the fungus to it, because the fungus is a natural, infectious
Yep.
fungus in the environment.
You are fertilizing it, possibly by accident, just by being there.
Mm-hmm. Well, once again, it's like, for people who gather and stuff, just setting up a spot in the forest that is ideal for the growth of the thing you want.
Yes.
And then coming back and hoping that nature took its course. Yeah, I mean, I can picture that in kelp forests. I can picture
Absolutely.
that and all over the place in places that we might not have zoomed in enough or noticed.
Yeah. Well, and if snails can do that, I mean, fish could absolutely pull off something like
Crustaceans.
Crustaceans. So this is an interesting, and now as far as I know, this was, 20 years ago that this paper came out. I don't know that there's been a ton of research on it since then. I haven't heard of any other species being discovered that do something similar to this, but this does make it's possible that this kind of animal fungus symbiotic relationship is more common and perhaps easier to achieve than we thought it was.
It also makes sense how it would be easy to miss, because at a glance, it just looks like they're eating the grass.
Yes.
They're using the same mouth parts and technique that a snail uses to eat grass.
They crawl over the grass, and then when they leave, there's a hole in the grass.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they eat the grass.
Yeah, there's no mystery. So I can imagine might be other animals that are just like, yeah, they're eating the grass. Like, are they?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Question everything.
That is...
How cool is that?
So cool.
It's awesome.
Oh, man.
Oh, hey, before we move on, there's one more thing to say. This is a new piece that's being recorded later, because since we're talking about the evolution of fungus farming animals, there is a new paper relevant to this that was released literally a few days after we recorded all the rest of this discussion.
Yeah.
So we're putting it in here. This is a paper from very recently in 2024 by Ted Schultz et al. In Science, which is genetic information about the evolutionary history of ant and fungus relationships.
Cool.
This paper does a big phylogenetic analysis, so the family tree, looking at the genetic information for fungus farming ants and their relatives, a total of about 300 species. And they also did a family tree for the fungi cultivated by fungus farming ants and their relatives.
Oh, cool.
About 500 different species into these two big trees to try to see when do we see major evolutionary events and potentially the origin of fungus and ant relationships. Their genetic analysis estimates that fungus and ant agriculture, that this tight connection between the groups, originated around 66 million years ago.
Okay.
Now, that is a notable date.
Yes.
And in fact, it's not like in the vicinity, almost exactly 66 million years ago, according to their genetic estimate. That is the end of the Cretaceous. That is when the mass extinction happened. It is not at all unheard of for a mass extinction to clear ecological space for new groups to evolve and adapt. In fact, we've talked not terribly long ago about research that has found similar patterns with things like birds and snakes, that there was a radiation after the end Cretaceous mass extinction. Now, one thing that the authors of this paper do make a point to note is that not only did the end Cretaceous extinction clear a lot of ecological space, But also, as we have mentioned in the past, and as we talked about in the first episode of this fungus trilogy, the end Cretaceous mass extinction is associated with high levels of hardship and difficulty for plants and potentially high success for fungi.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
So it's possible, again, this is hard to say for sure, but it is possible that in a world where plants were harder to come by and fungi were easier to come by, ants that were able to feed on fungus might have had an advantage, and that might have been the start of this agricultural relationship.
I can also just see the simple statistics of if fungi are diversifying, you're just raising the odds that ants that also seem to be diversifying after this extinction are more likely to find a compatible relationship.
Yes.
It's just more species and more lifestyles mean more opportunities for weird lifestyles to show up.
The research also estimated around 27 million years ago, which is toward the end of the Oligocene, is when it seems an ancestral fungal lineage became an obligate symbiont with ants, which is to say, only farmed by those ants, or as they put it, domesticated.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
By the ants. This seems to be like the modern version that we think of, where you only find this fungus in these ant farms. This is around the time that we see spreading of dry environments and dry habitats taking over for wetter forests and such. It's possible, the authors note, that spreading of dry habitats might have isolated some fungi away from the moister forests and such that they ancestrally were from, and it might have meant that it was beneficial for their survival in this shifting habitat to get a leg up from the ants that are eating the fungi.
Yeah. Or may have ended up where the ants were one of your only options.
Yeah. If your habitat was destroyed, you might not be able to survive as a free-living fungus anymore.
But the ants might have been maintaining the right environment well enough to make it your last port in a storm sort of thing.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Very cool. Now, as far as I know, I don't know of research like this that has been done with termites and beetles that farm fungus. It would be fascinating to see if we see a similar pattern. But at least according to this extremely new research, it seems that ants have been farming fungi to some degree for over 60 million years, and farming it to the modern degree for perhaps almost 30 million years.
Yeah.
Very cool stuff.
Awesome.
All right, go back to the original recording. Listeners, this concludes our discussion of fungi and animals. This will hardly be the last time that fungi or animals are mentioned on the podcast. Oh, and indeed, not the last time that they will be mentioned in the same breath. But it is the thing that we will finish up this episode with. And, indeed, the trilogy.
Yes.
But before we say goodbye to our fungal trilogy, there is one thing left to do, and that is our patron question. One of the benefits that our patrons can get from supporting us on our Patreon is the ability to submit questions for us to answer here on the podcast. Will, what is our patron question?
Our question is from Sarah May, who notes that on the Baskin Coil t-shirts, the ones you can get if you sign up at the upper levels of Patreon,
Yeah,
there is an alligator being held up by a snake from a tree branch.
that's true.
Assuming the tree branch could support the weight, what species of snake could manage this feat of strength? I'm also assuming that it's an American alligator, which is correct.
Yep.
Dangling there, in which case, feel free to cheat by swapping him out with a wee little dwarf caiman.
This is a fantastic observation and question. Yes, at upper levels of our Patreon, there is a special Baskin Coil t-shirt that you can get. Art by our friend Rob Soto, who does fantastic work. That is, in fact, Baskin Coil.
Yes.
On the shirt. Basque is canonically Alligator mississippiensis, an American alligator. Coil canonically is a gopher snake.
Yes.
Which is Pituophis that we get here in North America. Now, I did go ahead and pull up some stats. Alligator mississippiensis often grows between, you can tell me if any of my numbers are wrong, between 10 to 15 feet long, 3 to 5 meters, up to 1,000 pounds.
Yep.
Females tend to be smaller.
Yes.
Dwarf caimans, which are quite small, are only 3 to 5 feet long and 11 to 15 pounds.
He's adorable.
Little tiny guys. Gopher snakes, Pituophis catenifer or Pituophis melanoleucus, grow between 3 and 7 feet long, 1 to 2 meters.
Which is longer than I always forget they can get that long.
Yeah, I think like record gopher snakes can be like 7 to 8 feet long. Oof. They are among the biggest. They're like in the top 3 biggest snakes in North America. They get quite big. And they typically weigh a whopping 2 or 3 pounds. A giant gopher snake might weigh 10 pounds or so. Because snakes do not have a lot of bulk to them.
Yes, lots of length, not a lot of mass.
So like a 10-pound gopher snake and a 11-pound dwarf caiman, that one could probably work.
Yeah, yep.
3 pounds of gopher snake is not going to hold up a half a ton of American alligator.
No, it's gonna need to. If it was a baby alligator,
sure.
If we said that was his baby picture.
Now, because the question was what species could pull it off, I do want to make mention of the world's largest snakes. Eunectes murinus, green anacondas, can grow up to 5 meters long, sometimes more than that. And the record holders are likely around 6 meters or 20 feet and around 200 pounds.
Yes.
Because anacondas are beefy. Those are big, thick snakes. Anacondas, however, green anacondas, not arboreal. I don't imagine a green anaconda would be good at holding stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
I don't know that it could hold itself up super well in a tree, let alone something else with it.
But you know who is good in trees?
Yeah.
Malaeopython reticulatus.
Yes.
Reticulated pythons, which can be 6 to 8 meters. The really big ones are like 6 to 8 meters and up to 100 to 150 pounds. They get longer than anacondas, but they do not get heavier than anacondas.
Yes.
So like a giant reticulated python, which are tree dwellers, at 150 pounds would struggle immensely to hold up an adult American alligator. Like snakes are notably extremely strong.
Yes.
They're very muscular.
There's a lot of muscle to the body mass that you have.
Yes. But like even a moderate sized American alligator is 10 times the weight.
Like the 2 females we had at the aquarium, which were both like a little more than 5 feet long. Adult, but not big. Females tend to max out, I think, around like 8 feet. It's like the biggest females tend to get like 8 feet. So this is upper, this is moderate sized females. If I remember right, they weighed just a little less than I do.
So about the same as our giant reticulated python.
Yep, 200 and change. So like even for a moderately sized adult female, that's still outweighing the largest reticulateds.
And like a reticulated python anchored in a tree could probably hold up something bigger than itself.
Yes.
Like, they're very strong. They could absolutely manage that. But Basque is a full-grown American alligator. A male American alligator, presumably.
Yes, he's definitely a male because they get bigger, and I'm still a 12-year-old at heart, and I want the big ones.
Now, it is worth noting that in that artwork, which is phenomenal, and Rob did an incredible job, if these animals are their canonical species, they are not to scale.
No.
Because gopher snakes, bull snakes, pine snakes, it's all the same. Basque should be at least twice as long as coil is and weighs 100 times more than coil does.
Yep.
But then they don't look as interesting next to each other.
They're cartoon characters.
They're cartoons.
They can resize as need be. And it's even if we go back to like giant fossil snakes, you run into the same problem you run into with the anaconda of like Titanoboa has the muscle to probably manhandle a croc, but could it pick one up?
Right.
I don't know how high you could lift your head off the ground.
And there are modern pythons that have been recorded eating crocodiles.
Yes, absolutely.
So, like, there are absolutely big modern snakes that can prey upon modern crocodilians.
Mm-hmm.
They are not typically preying upon very big crocodiles.
Yes.
Like, usually that's going to be a smaller one.
Yeah, the famous example are anacondas and caimans.
Mm-hmm.
And
anacondas are huge and caimans are not.
yes, and exactly what you don't hear about is anacondas going after adult black caimans.
Yes.
Which are the size of American alligators and are the heaviest predator in South America.
Yes.
No one bothers a black caiman.
Yeah. Now, of course, there are great like images and videos of snakes that have grabbed prey from up in a tree.
Yes.
Pulling the prey up into the tree. And you will see this. Usually you see this with like rodents.
Yes.
Or birds, which, I mean, compared to a small snake, those are still pretty heavy. You will occasionally see something like that with, like, a deer.
Yeah.
And it's a python. Because they're snakes are extraordinarily powerful animals.
So, like,
it's all muscle. There's no wasted space for, like, pesky limbs to get in the way.
You're just a cord of muscle.
It's just muscle.
So I could absolutely see, like, a reticulated python lifting a dwarf caiman or something up off the ground.
Sure.
For
sure.
Definitely.
And if it's a tiny dwarf caiman, yeah, even some of our North Americans, a big gopher snake could probably pick up a small dwarf caiman.
Yeah, like a...
You're in a similar size range at that point.
Absolutely.
But an American alligator is that's a tough task.
Yeah.
They're just real big.
They're just chunky animals.
Sarah Mae, thank you so much for admiring the artwork and for giving us that fun little brain teaser.
I like to think that it's they've got a harness thing going on. Like those, the when you want to fake hang someone in a movie and you have a harness. Basque has this harness hanging him up, and then Coyle has gotten in position.
Basque has one of those transparent stands underneath him, like for toys.
It's up a pant leg. He's wearing alligator pants.
Yes.
So that it looks like it's his normal skin.
Fake alligator.
Fake
pants,
alligator.
obviously.
Crocodile
pants.
pants.
These are faux crocodile pants. Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't wear alligator skin. I'm not a monster.
Sarah Mae, thank you for that patron question. Listeners, this brings us to the end of our fungus trilogy.
It was a lot of fun.
This was so much fun. I'm so happy we did this.
Yeah.
Episode 200 was such a cool milestone. Very fun. We were more than happy to do it justice.
Yeah. Indulge
and do a big 3-episode extravaganza, which we've never done before.
Yeah.
This was a new thing for us. Episode 200, Fungi. Episode 201, Fungi and Plants, with special guest Dr. Ali Baumgartner. And this, episode 202, where we've worked our way back to our roots.
Yes.
And it's just going to be animals from here on out. Be sure to check out the blog post after this episode. There will be pictures. Some of those pictures will be a little bit disturbing.
Oh, yeah.
Not too bad. I try to keep the blog relatively light. But check that out. There will be links for more information. There are also blog posts with links and pictures for the last 2 fungus episodes, as well as all the episodes of our podcast. This episode comes out right in the middle of October, smack in the middle of spooky season. We have been evolving tiny monsters all throughout the month. There's more to come. Check that out. We've got a spooky live stream coming up in November. Also, we are nearing the end of the year and the end of our Spotlight series. Those will still be coming out, so make sure to listen to those. And not long after this episode comes out, we'll be releasing the end of the year Q&A form.
Yeah.
So you can start thinking about what questions you want to submit for the end of the year Q&A 2024. Thank you so much to all of the people who sent in requests for us to talk about fungi or fungi and plants. All together, it was like 120 requests. It was preposterous.
That's so
cool. An enormous thanks, of course, to our patrons for supporting us, and to all of our listeners for listening, even if you've only ever downloaded 1 or a few episodes. I assume if you're listening to this episode, you've listened to at least 3 episodes. That support in download numbers, in what it tells the algorithm to do, if you follow us on social media, if you follow us on Discord, Any amount of that support is really helpful for us, and it has allowed us to get to the point where we could do a massive celebratory fungus trilogy.
But and it got us to 200 episodes. Like, you all are the reason we got here. If we didn't have you all supporting and encouraging and showing us that people were listening, we wouldn't have made it to 200 episodes. This is incredible.
So thank you all so much for your support. There's been a lot of fun engagement with these fungus episodes. Keep that up. Leave comments on YouTube. Join us in the Discord server. Send us emails. However you want to get in touch with us. Go down to the episode description and find links to our website, to our Patreon, to all of those wonderful places. Thank you so much for your support. This has been a ton of fun. And we will now return you to your regularly scheduled other stuff.
Yeah.
A extra special thanks to our patrons, whose support allows us to do all of our science communication endeavors up until now and continuing into the future. And an extra super special thanks to our top tier patrons for their extra super special support: Sarah May, Danielle the Bug Lover, Robert Mart, and Melissa Barksdale. We release episodes every fortnight. That is every 2 weeks. There are new episodes here on the podcast, and sometimes there's more episodes in between those, like during spooky season, or our Spotlight series, or we did a mini episode compilation not too long ago.
Nope.
We're going to do an end of the year Q&A at the end of the year. We do a lot. We say we release episodes every fortnight, and that is true.
Yes.
But there's so much. There's a lot of bonus.
Oh yeah, it's great.
This has been man. I'm glad we put this off. To the point that we had to do something special.
Yes.
With it.
It was perfect.
This worked out so great. So now I guess I'll start planning episode 300.
Yeah. Get on it.
Stay tuned for that. Start planning now, and I'll be ready by the time it gets here in 3.5 years. Sign off phrase.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent Podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.